Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Flames of the Sun God by Grey Nimbus. During the intense 2-year training session with Silver's Rayleigh, Monkey D. Luffy and his mentor make a discovery that will push Luffy's training to an entirely new level. The Dark King braces himself wary as he begins to turn the Straw Hat Captain into the world's most ridiculous powerhouse. OP Luffy, OOC Luffy, Early DF Awaken Luffy. Big shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
Prologue. Nika had waited a long time for someone to claim her. Years of waiting, of evading the prison galores that ruled the world after that century. Waiting to feel that one. Most of her fellows weren't as picky as her, she knew. But for most of them, their domains didn't require nearly so much of the ones they chose as she did of hers. She'd almost wanted the red-haired boy who saved her from falling into the hands of the tyrants. Almost. He'd had so much in him that she adored: freedom, joy, love of the world in all its forms. But she'd made too many promises to be anything but completely sure, and she'd felt a different destiny in him, so she'd reluctantly passed over him, and continued to wait. Then she'd appeared. As soon as her aura entered the room where her fruit form waited, Nika felt her, and knew instantly she was the one. She'd stretched out her hand, tempted her other half to come and reforge them, gently urging the pirates to look the other way until the girl's teeth dug in and their bond was forged. Luffy. Nika adored her from the very start, from the shoreline to the forests with her brothers and finally out into the wide seas with her crew. Her other self is gangly, coming into her powers one bit at a time as she stumbled from one disaster and tyrannical force to another almost by accident. But Nika has waited for centuries. What's a few more years to that? Drinking in the spirit of adventure as Luffy grew strong enough to take all that weight upon her shoulders? Perhaps she was a bit too used to waiting. Nika had bristled as the Sands monster almost killed Luffy, when the model leopard had tried the same, when she'd been faced with the ice and light minions and was far too unprepared to even have a chance against them. But her human didn't reach for her true power, and forcing the issue was far too dangerous to her mind, so Nika had grimly waited the situations out, whether Luffy triumphed or just escaped with her life. She'd gotten out every time, and every failure prompted her to get a little stronger, closer to being ready. Yet right now, waiting seemed to be her curse. A secret second one hurtled at her by Mother Ocean when she took this form that Nika hadn't truly realized until right now. She waited as Luffy discovered that the boy she'd grown up with was slated for execution. Waited as she charged into impelled down. Waited as she was whiskers breath away from dying from poison and heat and cold, leaving Nika with the deepest fear that her promises would be left unfulfilled again. Waited as she cut into her life force processing the well-intentioned but terribly administrated miracle cure. Waited as she fought and ran and forced her way down only to be too late and the boy Ace was gone. Waited as she was thrown up into the sky and dropped from the frozen waterfall, and waited as she charged headfirst into this war where she's so desperately outclassed by most combatants there. No, waiting was a curse. She'd convinced herself otherwise all these years, wrapping herself in the confidence and certainty that she would make the sun rise for those in chains when the time came. Clinging to that cold comfort with both hands had clearly lulled her into a false sense of security. This was hell. Nika's scream of rage, frustration and edging panic when Light's Chosen shot a hole through Luffy wasn't tangible to the people on the battlefield, but she knows she rang the bell of every other sea devil for miles. She doesn't really care, either. She doesn't want to search for another wielder. Luffy is the one, she knows it, it's written in the universe. She loves her. You're not ready for this, she pleaded with the girl as she struggled, trying to force herself up to start running again even though she's bleeding out and so weak and everything is awful and she's so close yet so far. You have to retreat. No, Nika jerked back, blinking rapidly. In the darkness of Luffy's mindscape, suddenly her other half is right there before her. As her heartbeat shivered and started to weaken, the bloodied girl blinked into existence, clutching her chest and staring at her with wide, shocked eyes streaming with tears. An awakening? Surely not, it was too soon, and yet, Nika couldn't deny the situation. The sensation washed over her, just as it had so many years before when her last wielder had come before her this exact same way. Luffy was truly one of a kind. Or mad. Or both. Nika is pretty sure her crew had long decided it was both. I have to save him, Luffy said, clutching her chest. Nika stared, shaking her head. You're not ready, she protested. This was not what she'd expected. She didn't think they'd have this conversation for another few years. Your haki is just barely awakened. The true power will rip you to pieces. I don't care, you'll die before you can save him. I don't care, Luffy screamed, all love and desperation and despair and pleading, and Nika fell quiet from the sheer force of emotion. I can't let him die in chains, I can't, it's not right. He's been trapped by people hating Roger all his life. I love him, I love him. Chains. The words struck Nika's consciousness hard, and despite all her care and loyalty to her role and the promises she made, she doesn't shut Luffy out of this space as she'd been preparing to. You'd think she of all beings, the one who understood Luffy best, would know better. I need all of you, Luffy barreled on, her image shivering as her body got weaker. I don't care what happens to me. I want him to be free, please. Nika thought about it, truly let herself think about it in those terms, about how that boy had been slated to have the life he'd barely started cut short because he had been born to Roger, as if that had been a choice he made. They were forcing this wicked law upon the world, that they had the right to kill because you existed in a fashion they disapproved of, and he would be their demonstration. His life would be discarded like it was less than worthless. Anger welled up inside her, her own emotions mingling with Luffy's, and she realized she's lost the argument before truly able to start it. Nika reached out and placed her hand on Luffy's quivering head. Very well, she decided. Those brown eyes light up as bright as her own sun. I'll have to carry us through this. This awakening is premature, and it will make your path from here more difficult than it would be otherwise. She'll be revealing herself before the army of the tyrant, and would ever others discover the truth from this televised battlefield, Luffy would be in frequent danger. But Luffy was almost always in trouble, usually because she went looking for it. Luffy, I hope you survive this. Luffy merely beamed at her as their minds meet in the awakening, overjoyed that Nika was letting her have her way, and the drums of liberation roar. The ground shook and lightning erupted from Luffy's prone body. Nika stretched out her limbs and hopped up into the air, wincing slightly at all the battle damage she can feel, quickly using her power to bypass them. She chuckled grimly, rather than a full-body laugh as the battlefield reeled at the sudden haki pressure. Usually she could find joy and amusement in just about anything, but the consequences of this situation are too dire. Luffy is only half conscious, her mind scattered and unfocused, and Nika can feel the strain of this on her body. Whipping out one hand and seizing her background lightning, Nika swept her gaze over the battlefield to take stock while everyone was still reeling from the power surge of her appearance. Those walls need to go, and the biggest threat to Ace aside from the two law dogs on either side of him are the three mutts in the plaza. Luffy, Ace gasped, jerking forward as far as he was able in the chains pinning him to the execution platform. The power blast had nearly knocked him senseless. He wasn't willing to chalk it up to his torture and impelled down and lingering exhaustion. The adrenaline kick of his family coming to his rescue in spite of him putting them in this position had taken care of TD in the sky, bouncing in place and chuckling in a dry, angry manner while literally crackling with power. Her hair has turned pure white and her eyes were glowing like an awakened zone on a rampage. But that doesn't make sense. Lu had eaten a paramecia fruit. She's a rubber person, what? Nika swung her arm out and unleashed a storm of lightning into the plaza itself. The orderly lines of Marines separating her from the scaffold scatter like ants. Dozens and dozens of men either blasted into unconsciousness immediately or picked up and flung like dolls by the impacts. Light's wielder didn't even bother to dodge or bring up his haki, assuming that this is the same underpowered girl he'd skewered minutes ago. Nika tried not to take too much pleasure from slamming a lightning bolt into his chest that flung him half the length of the island and smashed him into the concrete of the Marineford tower. Lava and ice were a little less arrogant and dodged with their automatic defenses, and she doesn't have much time to take satisfaction in their reeling surprise. The seastone walls have to go first. They were obstructing most of the Whitebeard pirates, along with the old man Quake loved so much. Nika bent her body downward and dropped like a missile, crashing into the concrete and spreading her power across it. What is this pressure? Whitebeard wondered in shock, and it took a lot to shock the oldest emperor of the sea after everything he lived through. Until a moment ago, that little girl in Roger's hat had been badly wounded and exuding no more power than a typical Paradise rookie. But that eruption of energy when she shot up into the sky, her form changing, was so heavy it was as if she'd been replaced by someone or something from the new world. The ground suddenly rippled beneath his feet. No, it didn't tremble slightly like one of his weaker quakes. It wobbled up and down like it had spontaneously turned into pudding and a child was shaking the bowl violently to get it away from a greedy friend. Whitebeard dug his Bacento into the ground to steady himself. Or tried to, because the ground stubbornly resisted, stretching rather than being impaled. An ungodly shrieking of metal hit his ears. It took him a few moments to fight against the vertigo and triangulate where it was coming from. It was below? Ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Nika laughed scornfully, punching the concrete hard before jumping up and down on it, emulating Luffy on the white clouds in Angel Island. Her powers couldn't pierce through the stone walls themselves, but with how they had risen from the ground on command, she knew that they were on some kind of track and pulley system, and that couldn't all be made of sea stone. It would be wasted where it couldn't obstruct pirates. She shook the whole island, cracking apart concrete and metal as the rubberized areas they were attached to tore them away from their systems or simply shattered them apart with a sudden, violent stress. Sending another violent ripple about as big as one of Whitebeard's lesser quakes did the trick. The walls directly behind her began falling rapidly back into the plaza with tortured screams of metal. No! Sengoku screamed in alarm, his eyes widening immensely at the sudden, impossible sight. Garp's insufferable granddaughter launched herself in the air like a spring, so fast she was almost a blur. Neatly avoiding the hail of magma an enraged Akainu subsequently sent her way. Hovering in the sky, she swirled in place and looked scornfully down at him. Her body had transformed, taking on the characteristics of weight. It couldn't be. Whitebeard straightened up when the ground stopped shaking, abruptly reverting to its real shape. Her fruit has awakened, he realized, thinking even as he raised his arm and urged his sons onward. He needed to take advantage of this twist of fate quickly. Is this really all stemming from rubber powers? No, I believe it in any other situation, but what I'm sensing from her now. Ha 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 ha. Ace's girl laughed again, and this tone of hers is definitely mocking and subtly different from the rude girl who'd had the nerve to tell him off on his own ship. There's an elegant edge that wasn't there before. She bent her body in a completely unnatural crescent to avoid the next magma jet that Mutt threw at her, then flew off like a balloon that had just been violently punctured. She zipped off to the very top of Marineford, her fingers hooking in the edge of the rooftop. There's a titanic tearing sound and half of the roof is ripped loose in her hands, staying together in one piece instead of crumbling into thousands of shingles, bits of concrete and wood fragments. And she chucked it like a discus at the man in retaliation. Wool gathering. I'll ponder the bizarreness of awakened powers once we have Ace back. The old man decided quickly as Akainu was through a rapid barrage of magma at the attack to avoid getting ground into the dirt. I doubt that power burst will last for too long after all the punishment she's taken. Nika hadn't expected that to take the man out, just to distract him. She flung herself out across the sky, flying overhead in an arc to pick out where Whitebeard and Luffy's new friend Jimbei were. That's how we'll get rid of them, she reassured her other self. Luffy's soul buzzes with joy and wonder at her power, though Nika doubted she'd remember much of this afterward. She dropped to the ground, waving around light bursts from Kizaru. Bah, he's awake already, of course. Whistling, she bent over backward to avoid the next burst of light when she touched down again. Then she straightened up and massively enlarged her teeth, making them pearly white and intensely reflective. Kizaru's attempted flash step to get up in her face and keep her from dodging his next attack gets refracted on the surface and shot clean out of Marineford and out across the ocean. Nika snapped her head back to normal and Luffy's snickering slips through her mouth. It's lucky, really, that he had fought Luffy before and had been thoroughly confident she was powerless against him. Because she had been, until now. Light would be sulking about this one for quite a while, Nika just knew it. Akainu had come up right behind her in the moments she'd taken to get that smug bastard off the battlefield, But that had been a calculated risk. Before he could bring a magma-fueled fist down on her head, Whitebeard dropped an earthquake right behind him, striking the man from behind. "What the hell have you done to yourself, brat?" the old man asked as Akainu was sent stumbling away from her. Nika turned around and smiled mysteriously at him. She couldn't speak, not really. She and Luffy were holding this together with willpower and pure stubbornness. She needed every speck of strength that she could scrape together diverted to other means. Instead, she pointed directly upward at the sun before pivoting toward Akainu again. She's too far away to hear Jinbe's intake of breath. Instead she stuck her tongue out at the unhinged man who slaughtered Robin's people and pulled down an eyelid mockingly. She saw the rage kick in and stepped 3 feet to the side so she wouldn't be in Whitebeard's way. Ace was her priority still. The 2 old men on either side of him were staring at her with mounting shock and disbelief. Of course at least one of them would recognize her for who she is. How to get around them? She didn't want to fight them straight up. She didn't have the time if she wanted Luffy to survive this, so she had to get around them instead. Her eyes fell on the execution stand itself. The top half was sea stone, but just like the walls, they couldn't make the whole thing out of the precious material. Likely the Marines were using their entire stock of it in this effort to kill Ace and his father, and they couldn't afford to have it where it wasn't useful. Nika grinned, unfazed by Whitebeard and Akainu's battle going on right next to her, and began to spin like a top. Luffy would call it gum gum buzzsaw, probably. She zipped past the bat underneath the tower, narrowly avoiding Garp dropping down to block her path. She bounced between the 4 supports of the tower, using her inertia to saw through the metal as fast as possible before unwinding herself, stopping, and delivering the hardest kick she can muster against the back leg of the stand. Sorry Ace. The tower crashed forward, Nika staggered, clutching her chest for a long, painful moment. Luffy's body couldn't take this much longer. Water rushed up from the platform, Jim trying to head off Sengoku for a few precious moments. She could hear a massive roar from all of Ace's siblings as they surged into the plaza to lend a hand. Nika ran forward, to the head of the platform. Ace was lying half on the ground, half dangling from the chains on his arms. For a second she was afraid she'd knocked him out or worse, injured him, but he twisted her way the instant her footsteps approached him. "Luffy," he gasped when she stopped by his side and sank to one knee, grasping his arms right above the chains in one hand. The evil chains. Nika grimaced and quickly dug out the key Boa gave Luffy, slammed it into the cuffs as Sengoku roared at her, and twisted it in the lock. The unclicking sound filled her with a rush of euphoria before her power ran its course, forcing her to cede everything back to Luffy. Luffy, upon whom the stress and strain of the premature awakening fell on like the waterfalls of Wano, compounding her injuries, sending her spiraling into a bleak darkness instantly. 2 years later. "Wake up, Straw Hat. Wake up," Luffy moaned in protest, shying away from the hand shaking her. "Go way, Nami," she mumbled blearily. Her whole body ached from the memory her Nakama's voice is dragging her away from. Every scar feeling like she'd gotten it a week ago rather than 2 years. She pawed weakly around her soft pillows, looking for Sabo or Chopper or Zoro. But none of her comforting sleeping buddies were there to squeeze until the tremors went away. She made a distressed, upset noise at the realization. Where were they? They'd always been there when she had these bouts. It had first happened when she was with Rayleigh. Fragments of memories of her awakening and the feeling that all her wounds from that battle had reopened suddenly. After much poking and prodding when Rayleigh called him over in a panic, Trafi had concluded that it was a consequence of the way her devil fruit had awakened at Marineford. He'd stitched her up as best he could, but she'd have psychic pain where she'd been hurt in bouts forever. Which sucked and was stupid. Who made her body so it would randomly decide to remember that one time she got beaten up really bad? She got better. She didn't care that she'd hurt herself that badly. It had been the price she'd needed to pay and she'd pay it 1,000 times over if she had to. But this was so dumb. She recovered from that fight. Not fair. Luffy burrowed her head deeper into the bed, wishing one of the minks would come over so she could cuddle with them at least. She's not in complete agony, but it hurts. It feels like soreness and hot pins and needles in her chest, arms, legs. Pure low-key misery. She wanted to sleep until it went away. "You seriously think I'm Nami? Wake up." A firm hand grabbed her shoulder, shaking her again. Luffy grumbled incoherently, flinching from the rough movement. "Damn it, Luffy, Big Mom's lion has finally woken up and we have a problem." "Trafi?" Luffy mumbled as her brain slowly started to kick into gear. She blinked blearily upward, and sure enough, her favorite captain, okay, favorite after Shanks, slowly came into focus. He looked agitated, but not in a funny way like when she threw a party after capturing Caesar. Then the rest of his sentence catches up with him and she sits up in a flash, despite her limbs screaming in protest. Her heart skittering happily. "You called me Luffy." Trafi always called her Straw Hat before. He was far from the only one, Smokey and Sword Girl, and honestly most people she met called her that. But Luffy had been trying to get him to use her name for ages. They're friends now, they beat down Mingo together and they're in an alliance. But he kept calling her Straw Hat anyway. It drove her nuts. He's finally said her name. It sounds really nice on his voice, somehow. Luffy wasn't sure where that thought come from, but the sight of super serious Law going red at the cheeks and sputtering in a familiar way causes her to laugh and forget about it. That's, do you only ever listen to every third word I say?" the dark-haired doctor demanded, looking elsewhere. "Peckham's, Big Mom's minion who is the only one who knows where your cook is and what's going on. He's woken up and is asking after you." Luffy stopped laughing immediately. Sliding to her feet and ignoring the shiver that runs through her muscles, she seriously asked, "Where?" Her left hand balls into a fist. "Sanji." "Which infirmary? Wasn't Chopper looking after the minks over there somewhere?" She started to run off, causing Law to grumble something and grab her by the arm. "Just follow me," he said, holding her wrist firmly but weirdly gently as she snapped back to his side. "Right," she muttered, nodding like a bobblehead and letting him pull her along. Luffy has just enough self-awareness to acknowledge that she's not good with directions, and she needs to find out more about what happened to her cook right now. "We never should have split up," she thought unhappily. It had been necessary for Trafi's plan to work, but she'd hated every minute of her precious people being separated. It had been painful for 2 years and she liked it even less once they'd finally gotten back together. And now Sanji ran off. Up and left them behind just like Robin did to try and solve this without them, and Luffy hadn't been there to smack him upside the head and demand he take them with him. And why do the people she loved do this arg? No, calm down. They'll get Sanji back, no matter what Big Mom or anyone else has to say about it. Luffy shook her head to clear it. "Don't pass out on us like that," Law said after a few minutes as he pulled her away from their mounts, an odd cadence in his voice. "Your doctor flipped out and wouldn't calm down until he'd checked your breathing and blood pressure." "Didn't mean to," Luffy whined rebelliously. "It happens when I'm tired." She'd passed out the same way after they defeated Mingo. He should know this already. "NGH." Law gave her a vexed look. "You're so troublesome. The sun goddess should be a little more sturdy, don't you think?" "I'm sturdy," Luffy protested, indignant. She pouted at him, her expression intensifying when he wouldn't look at her. "Rude. I can fight for days just like you. Who beat down Mingo in the end again? Put more faith in me, we're allies." "Because you're stubborn and bullheaded and have no common sense," Law muttered. "And wild, and beautiful, and precious to me." Gah. He very carefully looked everywhere but at the girl who'd barreled into his life, forced her way past every wall he'd spent years putting up around his heart and made herself at home, boldly ignoring his every effort to hold her at arm's length. Showing kindness and loyalty to a man who'd come to believe there was little to be found in this era. Glowing like the sun, grabbing him and setting him dead center of her family without hesitation despite all of them screaming at her for trusting such an obviously dangerous person. Defending him just as furiously despite knowing him for a fraction of the time, making his dream come true and fighting with all of her might for it. Law had kept his heart carefully closed off ever since he was a child. His crew had trickled in as he chose them, and he'd slowly allowed it, but after his most precious person was torn out of his life, love was something he kept chained and imprisoned deep in the ruins left of his heart. Everyone he loved had been violently torn away from him, one after another. He let himself love his crew, though he'd neigh unless under tremendous pressure, but he kept it reserved and aloof, because it was safer that way. Love made him think of his parents, dead on the floor. Lammy burning in the hospital. Khorasan's apologies before he was shot dead. He wanted nothing to do with that love again. Some things were worse than death. See stone cuffs again. RRRRRGH. Not that stupid stone again. Ace had these on at Marineford, Old Man Zephyr had an arm made up of it, Smokey has it on the tip of his weapon. These dumb rocks are supposed to be rare, aren't they? Get out of here, our alliance is over. Luffy briefly glanced sideways at him and actually rolled her eyes. You sound like Ace, she said in exasperation. I didn't listen to him then either. Anyway, Robin. I can't even touch this. Ah, and Nami left with Sanji too. Do you still know how to pick locks? I'd say it's best we find the key proper, Captain. I don't quite have Nami's delicate touch, and if the lock jams from my efforts getting these off will become even harder. Okay. Where would we look for it? Are you even listening to me? Nope. Luffy turned and smiled at him, her warmth laced with ferocious determination that struck him speechless. I never turn my back on people I love. I'm gonna save you, Trafi. Hang on tight. She spun around and lifted Trafalgar onto her back, blissfully oblivious to the effect her words had caused. And yet, Law swallowed hard, hyper-aware of Luffy's warm flesh underneath his fingers. How oddly delicate her wrist felt to him, even though delicate was the absolute last word that could describe this wild menace. This confounding girl. She kept whining at him, oblivious to how her touch made his heart race, to how she made him feel. Law couldn't tell if she was doing it on purpose or not. She was often truly, stunningly clueless, but Luffy didn't say the word love lightly, even if he has no idea what she means by it. He pulled her down the hallway toward where Peckham's was recovering. Luffy finally stopped chattering at him, her serious face sliding on like a well-worn coat. Amazed you survived that, she heard Nami saying when she entered the room. The rest of her nakama were already there. Zoro immediately stood up as soon as he noticed her. Luffy nodded at him, ignoring the weird look that passed between her first mate and Trafi, and ran over to the bed where Peckham's was laid out. The lion mink was wrapped in bandages but otherwise looked healthy, if rather angry. I used my power to block half of it, Peckham's responded shortly as she approached. Big, you bastard. He must be plotting something he doesn't want Mama to know about. Why else would he leave with just Blackfoot? He pounded his fist on the mattress. I'm sorry, he took me off guard. It's fine. Luffy dismissed, dropping into the chair next to his bed. He was your nakama. Of course you didn't expect him to shoot you. Peckham's gave her a strange look at that before shaking his head. Who arranged this wedding on Sanji's behalf? It rankled her deeply. How could anyone put Sanji in a marriage without his consent? It wasn't marriage if two people didn't decide on it. It was Mama and the head of the Vinsmoke family, Peckham's responded, frowning. Did your cook never tell you who his father was? Though I suppose that a prince who abandons his crown and all his comforts in favor of being a pirate must not think too highly of it. Warning you of his father would have been wise. Vinsmoke Judge is the leader of Germa 66. Nami sputtered and then stalked up to the bed, looking indignant. What are you talking about? That's a mythical evil army. The stuff of comic books written to support the Marines. Trafi uttered a strangled wheezing sound, causing Luffy to shoot him a concerned look. His eyes were really wide. Don't be ridiculous. No, it's a real organization, Peckham said in all seriousness, and he had a genuine look to him, so Luffy chose to believe him. She rocked back on her heels, stunned. Unbidden, her mind went back to the note that Sanji had left them. Believe this if nothing else. I never intended to deceive you. Sanji. Of course I believe you. But why not tell me, what were you afraid of? And Blackfoot's father is its head. The Vinsmoke family. His family of assassins. Luffy processed that for a second, then scowled and shook her head. I don't really care about any of that, she said casually, causing Peckham's to stare at her again. She got a lot of those looks, so she ignored it. What I want to know is if Sanji is coming back. If he wants to get married, that's okay, but I'm not becoming subordinate to Big Mom. Peckham's gave her a wide-eyed look, then waved his hands. Straw Hat, Big Mom doesn't want you as a subordinate. In fact, she would like to forgive the tribute that you stole altogether. There's a brief moment of perfectly stunned silence in response to this. Who could blame them? It didn't make any sense. We? Luffy asked uneasily after a few seconds, before her crew could explode into a cacophony. Because she would like you to be her daughter-in-law. Peckham's responded, shocking the girl even more. Luffy reeled backward in shock, her hazel brown eyes growing incredibly wide. Was he serious? The lion mink reached into his pocket and pulled out a pink and white card, which he held up to her. Her name was on it. She stared. I wanted to avoid this, after you rescued my family and friends from Jack the Drought, because of how this would affect your crew and ambitions. But I was sent to deliver a marriage proposal on behalf of Big Mom and the strongest and greatest of her sons, Charlotte Katakori. Luffy snatched the card and stared at it. She read it 3 times in a row in an attempt to make sense out of it, but the only words were what he had just informed her. She was still staring at it as her crew finally started screaming in shock, alarm and anger. Get married. Sun goddess, I offer you my best and most noble boy, Katakori, in marriage. Grandpa, Luffy said with unusual seriousness, looking up at her parental figure. Nikino's bar was full of its evening regulars, who were torn between enjoying their evening meals and staring at the famous visitors who'd come to their island the morning. My dad is supposed to walk me down the aisle if I get married, but I don't have a dad. Would you do it instead? Garp choked on the steak he'd been happily enjoying a moment ago, wheezing and hammering his chest. Luffy yipped as her grandpa's shudders almost tossed her off his lap to the floor. What do you mean, wedding? Who's talking to you about such things, Luffy? Who's trying to make off with my precious princess? Nobody, Luffy protested, baffled by his reaction. Lots of fairy tales end with a pretty princess getting married, and I asked Makino about it after finishing the last book you got me. A giggle escapes her lips. Makino got really flustered and asked me if I'd heard about it from Shanks. I wonder why. Shanks told me once that a pirate captain has the authority to conduct a wedding on his ship. Does she want to get married? Garp's eye twitched uncontrollably, while his companion chuckled into his mug. What? I thought Makino was a quite sensible woman. Don't tell me she's gone and fallen for a pirate. Fallen for? Luffy blinked at him. Makino hasn't fallen down recently. He doesn't mean that literally, Luffy. The other man said, shaking his head. Falling for is often used as a romantic figure of speech. The girl uttered a little ah of comprehension. Then her brow scrunched up as it always did when she was thinking very hard, and a few seconds later she gasped. Makino wants to marry Shanks. She whispered with the tone of someone who'd come to a tremendous revelation. Forget it. I didn't say anything, Garp said frantically. Don't tell me you want to get married, my heart couldn't take that. Why not? Luffy protested. Because no man is good enough for my precious princess. Garp declared with all the authority of the hero of the Marines. The men in the bar felt shivers go down their spine even though they know it isn't directed at any of them. Many of them cast apologetic looks at Luffy, who they all think is a cute little troublemaker. They now sense a lot of broken hearts in her future. Whatever man fell for her would have to go through one of the strongest Marines in history. But that's not fair. Luffy flailed her arms. What if I want to get married in the future? Then whoever that person is will have to pass Grandpa's test. Only the best of men is worthy of you. You just said nobody would make you happy, Luffy pointed out, very much taken off guard at the idea of her grandpa denying her something as important as her potential wedding, aside from being a pirate, which she intended to do regardless of what he said. But a potential wedding was different from that. For all that it was a vague concept to her at 6, the story Shanks told her had the pirate's bride being really happy. Looking around for allies, she pivoted toward her grandpa's guest and grabbed his sleeve. Few others would have the nerve to do so, but the man's mystique was very much lost on her. Nay, Zephyr Gigi, if Grandpa is a big meaner and won't walk me down the aisle, will you do it instead? The purple-haired man looked down at her with something between shock, hesitance, and a conflicted longing brought about by a very painful loss he'd endured some years before. Well, that's. Don't indulge her, Zephyr, says the man who spoils her more than anyone. Zephyr deadpanned before looking down at Luffy again. Brief memories of his own wedding flicker through his mind, and despite his deep disapproval of the girl's dream, he shrugs and says, if I'm still alive by then, I suppose I could do so if Garp gives you trouble. Yay, Zephyr, Garp sputtered in protest, disbelieving that his old friend isn't taking his side. Zephyr looked both happy and pained when a cheering Luffy launched herself at him, hugging him and looping her arms around him several times. Hesitantly he patted her head, then lifted his gaze and gave Garp a very serious look. Garp, of course you want to protect her forever. Your little granddaughter is your greatest treasure. But even you and I can't keep them shielded from the world for all time. Eventually, she'll want something or someone you disapprove of, and you'll have to choose between your comfort and her happiness. When that time comes, choose wisely." For the life of him, Garp couldn't find the words to respond to that. Not with the weight of loss that he knows is attached to those words. Zephyr. "I'll invite you either way, Zephyr Gigi, you'll want to come, right? Even if there are pirates there?" Luffy looked up at him with big, hopeful hazel eyes. "They'll be real pirates, not lousy raiding fakers like the ones you've always fought." Zephyr glanced sideways, hesitant. "If I live that long," he allowed, and Luffy cheered, unable to read between the lines. Luffy blinked out of the memory, still staring blankly at the invitation with her head slightly bowed. All around her is chaos. "She's not getting married," Zoro shouted, flicking Shushi an inch out of his scabbard. "Luffy will be king of the pirates. Does Big Mom really think we'll allow her to try and take our captain to be one of her trophies?" "It's obviously a trap," Nami fretted. "I've seen Charlotte Katakori's wanted poster. He has the highest bounty of the entire fleet except for his mother. He'll be the biggest monster of the lot of them. He's worth over 1 billion berries," Robin acknowledges, nodding her head. Her eyes are half closed as she draws up the relevant memories, looking unconcerned despite the implications absolutely worrying her. Despite him not being the eldest, it's generally believed he'll take over the Big Mom pirates if or when his mother perishes. Usopp started hyperventilating, all but vibrating in place. "Oh no, Luffy, you gotta say no, you can't marry a monster like that." "A Yonko won't take a blunt refusal kindly," Brook pointed out, gently strumming his guitar. "She already has Sanji in her clutches. If there's any chance that she'll harm him in retaliation, we must bear it in mind. We're at war with Kaido now," Law said heatedly, gripping Kikoku ferociously. He's not shouting, but the venomous sharp edge to every word carries his voice into the chaos easily. "We can't afford to let Straw Hat Ya get trapped in Big Mom's web, now or ever." Chopper rushed over to his captain and hugged her arm, trying to read her expression. His captain, his big sister, was usually very easy to read. Luffy didn't feel anything quietly. Her joy, her anger, her amusement, her worry or her fear, it was always as brilliant as the sun's rays. And right now she looked perplexed. "Luffy?" The little reindeer zone prodded. "Worried?" Luffy made a faint sound and turned the card over again, her brow furrowing tightly. "But what about Sanji?" Frankie pointed out. "We can't just abandon our Nakama to a Yonko. Yet we also can't just give her our captain. We're in a tough spot here. I can't believe that idiot Cook has put us in this situation." Zoro seethed. "If I see him again, I'm going to kill him." Nami immediately slapped him upside the head. "The absolute hell you will," she bellowed as he cursed at her in protest. "He's our friend, and he's your friend too even if you won't spit it out because you insist on being such a man." "Friends?" The swordsman sputtered in disbelieving indignation. "With him?" Nami smacked him again, unamused. "Damn it, quit that, witch." Peckham's watched this all unfold with a disbelieving expression, sweat trickling down his brow as his eyes flickered between Straw Hat's first mate and the Surgeon of Death like he's watching a tennis match. He didn't think he'd be able to get clear of their attack radius in his current sorry state, and he's not interested in spending an indeterminate amount of time as a sentient head locked in a submarine's fridge. He should ITH Straw Hat privately. What a mistake. Luffy stared even harder at the invitation. Then she pointedly shot her fist into the ceiling with a crunch, and like magic, the babbling instantly stops. Retracting her arm, Luffy slowly stood up and fixed Peckham's with a penetrating stare. The mink began to sweat even harder, feeling rather like he was being pierced by the sun's unforgiving rays. Peckham's, the incarnated sun goddess, intoned, her usually cheerful voice eerily level. "I need you to explain something to me." He stared warily at her, reaching to tug his IV line free in case he needed to make a break for it. "Which is what?" Luffy held the card out in front of her face. "Katakori," she said seriously. "Does he actually want to marry me, or did his mom bully him into saying it?" There's a perfect minute of stunned silence as everyone in the room slowly pivots to stare at her. Luffy's expression doesn't change one iota. "There's no writing from him anywhere on this invitation," she barked, waving the paper furiously. Is this a weird joke? Who doesn't write their proposal personally? That's what you're upset about. Her whole crew shrieked at a volume that makes Tsushina's ears twitch in discomfort. Peckham's blinked rapidly at the sheer intensity of the ringing in his skull, and for the life of him he cannot figure out why Luffy doesn't seem fazed in the slightest despite the wave of noise being directed straight at her. She's still staring a hole in his head waiting for an answer. Mama arranges all her children's marriages, Peckham said when he could hear himself speak over the tortured ringing noise in his eardrums. She selects their partners carefully to create more and more alliances for her crew. It makes them stronger. So he doesn't even want to marry me. He wants to buy groceries, Luffy said, now looking well and truly offended. That's so rude. I didn't say that, Peckham sputtered frantically, his brain jamming as he tried to keep up with that logic. You're Nika incarnate. Any man would fight and die for the chance to marry you. Do you not know that? And what do groceries have to do with anything? The glares that both Zoro and Law leveled at him in response to that. Well, if both of those men didn't have Conqueror's haki, Peckham's was well and truly fooled for a moment. He half expected to blink and find all his organs sitting innocently in 20 different jars. Damn what Mama would have to say about it. There's no note from him anywhere on this card, Luffy complained, waving the offending invitation over her head. He hasn't even written me a nice poem. There's only his mom asking the question. I'd almost think Big Mom was asking me to marry her for all that he's visible on it. Usopp uttered a truly high-pitched shriek at that notion and Zoro's face turned an interesting shade of purple for a second. Robin, meanwhile, has clamped one hand over her mouth to smother a very heavy fit of laughter. Katakori is a man of few words, Peckham stammered out in sheer confused disbelief. This conversation has gone down such a strange road. Why, you'll understand when you meet him. Luffy eyeballed him with naked suspicion, judging his honesty, before seeming to accept his words, or at least that he believed them to be true. This doesn't seem to change her mood however, because she then crossed her arms and huffed. Gramps and Makino always said I can't marry a man I just met, she said stridently. It's not smart. We need to go on dates before we decide if we want to get married. So you can call Big Mom and tell her that Katakori and Sanji's bride can come and live on our ship for the next few weeks. I'm powerful enough to protect them so she can't complain about that. We'll travel together and then we'll know if we want to get married. Peckham's eyes widened into plates, and he shot off his bed with a shriek of disbelief. He couldn't have heard that right. He must still be unconscious from the morphine and having a bizarre fever dream. This girl couldn't possibly be that audacious. Did she have any idea what she was saying? He tried to imagine delivering that message to Mama and his blood pressure vaulted into previously unknown territory. Mercifully, he's not the only one. Her crew briefly went a uniform shade of white disbelief. Are you serious, Luffy? Usopp shrieked when he was physically capable of speaking. Please say you're not bringing a monster like that onto our crew. You're seriously considering it, Zoro roared. Luffy, just say no. Nami pleaded, her brain blanking at the idea of having Big Mom's chief soldier and any of his sisters on the Sunny. Are you out of your mind? Law demanded. Big Mom would never agree to that, and even if she did, her children would be honeypots. Their only task would be to deceive you and drag you back to her island after you let your guard down. Luffy turned toward him and blinked a few times. Didn't Usopp say something like that about you when we met? She asked confusedly, as if he's the one being ridiculous. Law twitched violently at the memory and gave the sniper a blistering look. The dark-haired boy yips and dove behind Frankie's massive frame for protection. Just because I had honest intentions when we forged our alliance doesn't mean Big Mom's children would. Law stressed, turning fully to face Luffy. Don't think that just because she's an emperor, she's anything like Whitebeard. They might both call their crews their families, but that's the only thing they have in common. Big Mom is not honorable or reasonable. If she gets the chance you would be nothing but her sugar-addled minion who only serves as a cog in her war machine. That should get through to her, right? She won't seriously contemplate courting a Charlotte. Any Charlotte. The fact that she knows about marriage and had given it enough thought to actually retain things she'd been told about it by parental figures not named Shanks didn't mean anything. It didn't, right? His heart relaxed ever so slightly when Luffy flared in response. That's never gonna happen, she snapped, crossing her arms. I will be king of the pirates, not her. And damn it, but Law believed her. He wanted to put the crown on her head himself. Luffy then slumped a little, looking frustrated. But I had to go get Sanji back, so I had to get to her island. She missed being able to just beat down anyone who tried to take her nakama from her. Arlong hadn't been this powerful. She's gonna have to be smart about this. Like Sabo. Sabo was all about super sneaky plans. He'd be so proud of her. So I'm gonna say that I'll come and go on some dates with him. She'll think that I'm definitely gonna fall for her trap and not suspect anything. On that feeling came right back. Law's eye twitched violently. He exchanged a wordless look with Zoro, and the other man's expression is identical. The two men briefly share a moment of sympathy instead of wariness and sizing up an opponent. We'll need a plan to get Sanji back, then if Cat actually likes me, I'll kidnap him and bring him with us. Luffy continued because she's deeply oblivious to their blood pressure needs. Peckham's uttered a tortured wheezing sound and clutched his chest. If he was at all sympathetic to Big Mom's minion, Law would have offered him a paper bag. You're not serious, Nami whimpered. That's just a joke, right Luffy? Luffy paused and gave her navigator an honest to Nika look of confusion. You have to run away with your fiancé before you get married, don't you? You're not marrying him, her entire crew shrieked, and their goddess had the absolute gall to look confused by it. Loud. Luffy complained, yanking her hat down over her eyes. She stood like that for a second, like they were the ones being unreasonable and just needed to get it out of their systems, before something suddenly occurred to her and she suddenly skipped up to Law. He tried not to jerk back in surprise. Hey Trafi. She actually looked serious, then bowed down. I'm sorry, I know this makes prep more tricky. I just can't leave my nakama behind. Luffy then straightened up, and there's a little glow in her eyes, her awakened form faintly bleeding through the way it always did when she was serious. I don't want to fight a Yonko without my cook. I need him. Law full body twitched, then forced himself to breathe. You know this about her. For fuck's sake, you were there when she forced herself to awaken her haki and her devil fruit mere minutes apart to save Portgas. You knew this when she kept breaking everything trying to save you. She did this for him too, she would fight an emperor for him. I know, he said shortly, then impulsively continued, we're going to need to make teams. I trust Beppo to get my crew and the samurai to Wano and begin setting things up, but some of yours need to come as well and get embedded in the local population. Time is not on our side. Luffy blinked. You're not going? But you hate not having plans. Aren't you the one making them for fighting Kaido? And you don't ever make any, which is why I'm going with you. Law responded doggedly, pointedly ignoring the disbelieving sounds from the traitors behind him and from Luffy's crew. Knowing you'll run up to Big Mom, punch her in the face and demand she give your cook back or else. She smiles and nods at him like he's a genius and he could already feel the headache coming on. The things I endure for you. Then it'll be Marineford all over again. So with that in mind, who do you want to send to Wano? Luffy frowned thoughtfully and grasped her chin. About 2 seconds later she snaps her fingers and grins. Zoro. Zoro is my first mate and he's the best at making sure things go smoothly. Because he's easily as reckless as you and leaves the thinking to others. Robin remarked lightly, leaving Zoro torn between glaring at her and looking so very pleased. I'll go to Wano as well, Luffy. We're really doing this, Nami moaned, rubbing her forehead. The captain has spoken, Zoro responded. He sounded like he was forcing the words out through his teeth. Robin gives him this gentle, sympathetic look and he scowls at her in response. Frankie, Usopp, you're coming with me. Law nodded, seeing his logic. Nami would get Luffy to Wano and Chopper would patch up the inevitable consequences of her idea of problem solving. Okay, Usopp mumbled meekly. He is not fighting with Zoro when he's in a jealous fit. No, he'd learned his lesson back in Alabasta. Luffy clapped her hands together. Good, let's get to making preparations, she declared. We're gonna need to pack lots of food. And restock on gunpowder and stuff. Her eyes widen and she snaps her fingers. Oh, and I'm gonna need a dress just in case. Can't pretend I'm a bride if I don't have a wedding dress. Nay, kitty. She turned on her heel and ran off in the direction of Cat Viper's room. Is there a seamstress I can talk to around here? Hang on, little sis, Frankie protested, hurrying after her. We need to do inventory first. Nami moaned pitifully and buried her face in her hands as Chopper and Usopp run after Frankie as well, babbling about medical supplies and tools and things for repairs. She doesn't even want to look in the direction of her captain's two present suitors. Nope, she's not getting in the middle of that. No sir, not even if you paid her. Robin walked over to her and gently pats her shoulder. There, the older girl said comfortingly. This is going to be a disaster. Nami groaned without raising her head. I'm not even sure who I'm afraid of more. Do you think Big Mom would kill me quickly, or does she draw things out? Robin hummed soothingly, moving to rub her back like a mother. Law's crew was rambling at him as well, so she guided the orange-haired girl off to one side so they could hear each other speak. We'd best place a call to those two about this, she reminded her navigator. Nami peeked at her from between her fingers. It took her a second to figure out who Robin was referring to, but when she did, her eyes grew impossibly wide. Is that wise? Nami choked out weakly, now well and truly getting visions of disaster. Fiery, burning disaster that would make Marineford look like a cheery romp in the park. That would make the Marines look at it and decide they hadn't gotten off that badly after all. Things could actually have been worse. If you're concerned about their reaction to being told Luffy might be getting married now, how do you think they'll feel if they find out during or even after the fact? Robin asked pointedly. Nami froze as still as a statue, slowly rolling that point around in her head. Then she calmly walked over to what she judged to be a relatively sturdy-looking pillar and began to knock her head against it repeatedly, cursing her captain in agonized despair. Robin let her do so for about a minute. Nami could hardly kick up a storm to vent with the still recovering minx in close proximity, before calmly interposing a hand between her forehead and the stone so she wouldn't hurt herself. Do you want to be the one to call, or shall I? Robin asked lightly. I'm not calling her father. Nami said adamantly, putting her foot down. Not happening. Luffy can tell him herself if she wants to. I think that's fair. Robin mused. Fine, I'll call them. But I want your moral support, Nami said, slumping in relief when Robin immediately nodded in assent. Then we'll go help our captain with the dress. There's a faint spark of light in her eyes at that. I haven't been able to play dress up in a long time. Robin chuckled. Honestly, she's just excited to see what Nami and the seamstress will do to make a bride out of her wild tomboy of a captain. Sanji stared out across the ocean as the ship inexorably dragged him back to the life he'd tried so hard to abandon, occasionally glancing down at the picture in his hands. His cigarette was slowly burning down to a stub as he exhales puffs of smoke in the vain hope that it will help him stop thinking, or at least think less. Big Mom's minion has finally left him alone, though he doubts that will last long, so he has nothing to do but dwell on the sorry situation he's in. Charlotte Pudding is beautiful. Delicate, cute, her eyes something to drown in. Sanji's heart jumped when he saw her picture, and then he was told she was a chef. The perfect woman. If he weren't being forced into this on pain of Zeph being killed, he would have gone after her without hesitation. Or he would have, if not for. Sanji put the picture down and dug around in his pocket for a new cancer stick. He could still hear his sunshine's laughter in his ears. Her yelling into the transponder snail at him to stay alive, to get to safety, that he's in charge and to take care of everyone. That she trusts him to handle it. They must be laughing, he murmured. That the future king of the pirates has such a useless crew member. He was able to protect Nami, Swan, Chopper and Brook, but he was completely unable to prevent them from being dragged into his mess the very moment after they'd provoked Kaido, the strongest creature alive. He remembered hearing about Marineford second-hand from Ivankov, dragging every agonizing detail out of the revolutionary and screaming at them for not protecting her better, for letting her get poisoned within an inch of her life, for allowing her to force a premature awakening that could have destroyed her mind and left her in the same state as Impel Down's jailer beasts. He screamed at him despite it not quite being fair, because he hadn't been as angry at Ivankov as he had been at himself. How he'd hated himself for being weak enough that Kuma was able to send him away that day on Sayobody. He should have been there with his sunshine every step of the way, protecting her so she wouldn't have had to spend minutes not breathing, not spend weeks in a coma, not have to expose herself as Nika to every greedy pirate and wicked tyrant who'd been watching that farce of an attempted execution. What kind of man fails the woman he low at? Luffy hadn't cared, hadn't even understood what he was getting at when Sanji apologized to her upon their reunion. When he spelled it out for her, she'd gotten mad at the notion he'd done anything wrong and smacked him repeatedly until he reluctantly withdrew the words in order to please her. Then she refused to entertain the subject when Mosshead edged toward it, actually glaring at her first mate. Sanji flicked his lighter uselessly a few times before managing to spark a flame. "She'll come for me," he thought gravely as he lit his new cigarette. "That's just who she is. It's a tactical mistake, though, isn't it? Maybe that bastard surgeon would argue her around to delaying the rescue until after they'd fought Kaido, at least. She might actually listen to him." But even as he ponders that, Sanji acknowledges the chances of that are very low. Sanji's blood pulsed in aggravation when he thought about the man, and how Luffy had gladly latched onto him and devoted herself to him like she'd known him as long as him. Despite him and everyone protesting. The tattooed menace had struggled and protested the whole way, put up a front, but he hadn't been fooled at all. He could see Luffy defrosting him like Nika's sun melting winter's snow away. Sanji could begrudgingly acknowledge he owes the man more than he could ever repay for saving his sunshine, but that didn't mean he was willing to tolerate yet another rival. Mosshead was bad enough. He was even worse. He refused to let the surgeon have a chance as well. Though admittedly, it was likely rather bold of Sanji to assume that he himself had a chance with his sun goddess. More than causing her so much trouble at a critical time, he knew she would blow it off as irrelevant. More than being the unwilling son of an evil empire. He knew there was a strong possibility he'd lost long before he'd ever had a chance. What was a prince to an emperor, after all? Sanji shook his head firmly at the thought, gritting his teeth at the familiar flare of determination. His heart refused to give up even now. He truly is a fool. He looked down at the picture of Pudding again, wondering if there's the slightest chance that meeting her could change things. He doubted it, though. He sent her a silent apology, hot guilt bubbling in his stomach. Nothing could be more humiliating than being promised to a man whose heart was distracted by someone else, after all. "Forgive me, you deserve better," he thought. "One of everything? For a single table? You're not serious?" "What, can't take a challenge, Patty?" He laughed as he grabbed the corn and the butcher's knife and moved to the nearest cutting board. The other man yelled something he didn't hear over the sound of his blood pulsing excitedly at such an opportunity to test his skills. He'd make every dish as delicious as the next. It took time, sending one dish out after another while the other cooks questioned how their new customer planned to pay for all of this. Zeph ordered 2 waiters to tend to the table in question exclusively, and he was as baffled as everyone else when the bewildered men reported that the table only sat 4 people, and one person was doing the lion's share of the eating. Sanji would believe that when he saw it. When he finally reached the end of the dishes, his curiosity got the better of him. He wanted to see who this mystery customer was, and if they were enjoying the fruits of his hard labor. He felt like he'd just pushed through a lunch rush. So he left the kitchen and walked out into the restaurant proper, passing by the harried waiters. Shee-hee-hee-hee. It's so nice, a beautiful, free-spirited girl's voice rang in his ears, briefly leaving him floating on air. His heart quickening, Sanji zeroed in on the table at a brisk walk. "Wow, you finally slowed down, Luffy. Do you not like that dish?" one of the 2 guys at the table asked, sounding vaguely impressed. "No, it's the best out of all of them." Her back is to him. Her curly black hair waves wildly when she shakes her head. The worn straw hat she wore fell down in front of her eyes. She laughed again, that unique and dizzying sound, and readjusted it. "That's why I gotta savor it." Sanji took a breath, smoothed his hair to the side and walked up to the table, planning to put the charm on as usual. "I'm glad to hear that. I'm the cook. I've never seen someone order half the menu before and I was curious." The chair twisted sideways in a flash and Sanji found himself underneath a pair of beaming hazel eyes and a brilliant smile, warm as the sun itself. "Aw, you made all of this for me? Thank you. It's so good." Monkey D. Luffy clapped her hands together, and Sanji lost all the words that had never once in his life deserted him so. His heart almost stopped in his chest, and long before Nika awakened he thought he must be in the presence of a goddess. Sanji shook his head and roughly ran one hand through his hair. For once, smoking wasn't doing a thing for his nerves. Slamming one hand onto the railing, he cursed the man who brought him into this world. He wonders if Reiju will be there when he's dragged before that warmonger again. He wondered if she'd be the same, or if Judge had crushed her spirit and her empathy over the years. If he'd broken the only family he'd truly had before Zeph and after his mother, Sanji might have to kill him. The sun was beating down warmly on the mountainside village when the familiar sound of the Moby's whistle blared across the distance. The kids who were playing in the yard all paused what they were doing and pivoted toward the mountain. When the whistle blasted a second time, they exchanged delighted looks. "Ace is back," a boy said happily. Come on, come on. "I hope Marco's with him," another boy fretted. "Mama's back has been bothering her again and nothing's helping her." "Maybe they have presents again." The girl put one hand on the jeweled hairpin she'd been given some months back, her heart pounding hopefully. "Oh, I hope so," she took off in a rush, causing her friends to sputter a barrage of protests and chase after her. "Hey, no fair. You have a head start." The group of children charged down the roads as a single unit. Their excited shouting alerting everyone in their wake as they go. A farmer rested his pitchfork in the ground and sighed in relief. "You worry too much," his wife said fondly. Edward raised that boy himself to be his successor. I know. Transitions like this are hard, is all. I can't help but worry for them a little." The man looked up and smiled at the familiar sight of Phoenix's flames shooting over the mountaintop. The kids really started screaming in delight. "How is he, by the way?" His wife chuckled. "Resting, if he knows what's good for him." Nightingale wasn't pleased in the slightest that he came back injured from that last expedition. He really needs to understand that he's retired now. The two share a warm laugh, glancing downtown. Among the buildings there is the home where their most famous child of their village had returned to after a long life of adventuring. Not many people here were old enough to remember him from before he'd left to become a pirate, but they all knew who he was to them, their father and protector. Marco the Phoenix swept down to a few feet from the ground, allowing the young man on his back to jump down with a laugh. The kids immediately formed a semicircle around them, cheering as Marco landed. "You're back." "Of course I am," Portgas d'Ace said warmly, ruffling the boy's hair. "I'll always come back." The wind made his long white coat flutter slightly around his feet. He's shirtless underneath it, but the long coat had become a semi-permanent addition to his outfit ever since his bounty poster was updated. "We missed you," the girl said shyly. "What did you bring back this time?" her friend asked, bouncing excitedly in place. "More toys? Treasure? Both?" "Did you get into cool fights?" Ace laughed warmly, waving his arms as the kids all began babbling at him and talking on top of each other. One at a time. I'm having trouble understanding everyone." Marco gave him a fond look, seeing how the kids hung on his every word and jostled to get his attention. "You're becoming more of a dad every day," he ribbed the younger man, who nevertheless now served as his captain. "Shut up, Marco," Ace responded cheerfully without looking at him, a light shade of red coloring his cheeks. "Come on, kiddos. Let's go to the bakery. You can tell me everything I've missed there and get some treats. Haruta and Vista be up with the cargo as soon as they can." The kids all cheer loudly. The two brothers let themselves be pulled along in their wake, heading to the downtown of the village. It's grown some over the past 2 years, more houses being put up and refugees from power struggles across the ocean stumbling onto the shores looking for somewhere to hide. It helped that the Marines were a sorely overtaxed organization that was bleeding money, men and infrastructure, so the pirates had been able to grab much more for the area, despite them very much facing their own problems. The world government had not come out well from the Paramount War. Sengoku's order to cut the cameras had come to absolutely nothing thanks to Buggy the Clown, who in his efforts to hype himself up and rebuild his reputation had given the whole world a front row seat to not just the awakening of the model Nika fruit, but Luffy devastating the Seastone Wall's support system, sending Kizaru flying out of the arena like swatting an errant fly, and bypassing both Garp and Sengoku to set Ace free. Her collapsing from the strain had given them no respite with the walls gone. Whitebeard and his sons had stormed the plaza, encircled Ace and the unconscious sun goddess protectively, and preformed a fighting retreat back to their ships. With Sengoku, Akainu and Aokiji still relatively capable of fighting, the Marines might have been able to salvage something from that disaster. But that was when Blackbeard had arrived with his escapees from Impel Down. While Buggy had still been pointing his visual den at the chaos, proclaiming himself to be the only man to have walked away from a battle with Nika able to rebuild his strength and crew. Of course, the terrified world citizens had been less interested in him than they were in the fact that monsters from whispered horror stories were suddenly not only freed from the supposedly inescapable prison, but had formed a single crew with a former warlord at the helm. To say this was something of a PR disaster for the world government was like saying that Luffy has a bit of an appetite. But these thoughts were relatively far from Ace and Marco's mind as they ushered the village kids into the bakery and greeted the girl behind the counter. Staying on their father's home island was soothing in a way very few experiences could compare to. "I'll have a look at your mom soon, I promise," Marco told the young boy reassuringly. The kid melted with happiness and began scarfing down his muffin with gusto. He glanced at Ace, who's knocking back a strawberry daiquiri and lounging comfortably against the bar as he amused the children with abbreviated stories of their trip. Odd as it was to see him wearing that long coat, it fit him now. Ace usually took it off during leisure time, not liking covering up his tattoo, but he'd picked it himself a while back. He wanted to visually emulate their father a little bit now, with him as acting captain. And the bastard retreated, trailing after his mother like a dog on a leash. Ace finished, his voice dripping disdain. "I almost feel sorry for the Marines with this being the best they can do to fill warlord positions. Wonder why Mihawk bothers with it. Is he really Grandpa Edward's son?" One of the girls asked dubiously. For the sake of plausible deniability, the kids had been taught not to refer to the old captain by his moniker. "'Cause he sounds like a punk." Ace snorted. "Even if he has Pops' blood, that doesn't make him his son. Or brother." He groaned and rolled his shoulder. "He almost hits like him, though." Before he could start on another story, however, Haruta stuck his head in the door and sighed in relief. "Oi, Ace. Call for you." He walked inside, holding a tray with a transponder snail that's all but wringing its shell off of its back. Very persistent, whoever it is. Ace arched an eyebrow, looking a little surprised, and set his mug aside. "Sorry kids. This might be important." He stood up and walked out of the bakery to a chorus of groans. Marco followed after him, making sure to close the door after him. Ace grabbed the receiver and lazily stated, "Yo. What can the Whitebeard pirates do for you?" "Ace-san." A semi-familiar voice shrieked through the snail, making the ravenet lean back slightly in surprise. The snail took on the features of a half-enraged, half-panicked navigator that he sort of knew but recognized instantly. "Oh, thank Nika, you finally picked up. I was starting to think I wouldn't be able to reach you. Wouldn't that have made my day just perfect? Ahahaha, I still can't get a hold of Sabo. I bet he's buried in some undercover mission that won't end for days, the inconsiderate jerk who serves as my captain's missing brain cells." "Nami?" Ace managed after a second of sheer surprise at the tirade. "Nami, is that you?" His expression worried so fast Marco could have blinked and missed it. "What's happened? Where's Luffy?" Nami gulped, and beads of sweat form on the transponder snail's head. "Luffy's fine, we're fine. Not sure how long that'll last, with this ridiculous. She's getting fitted for a dress. I'm just calling to pass information along." "A dress?" Ace parroted in confusion. "What for? You're not still in Dressrosa, are you?" Luffy had pounced on the transponder snail number he'd given her after Marineford and called him incessantly, even after she started traveling, but her crewmates hadn't always joined in. Having her navigator call him with her nowhere to be heard, and sounding more stressed out than Dandan after they'd gone crocodile hunting? His heart started to pound painfully in his chest. "No, we're in Zo, and the problem is," the snail's eyes swivel from side to side, suggesting Nami was pacing. "Big Mom sent Peckham's and some other goon of hers, Beeg or something, to kidnap Sanji for a wedding to one of her children. Peckham's was gonna let the whole thing go because we saved the minks here. Jack the Drought had attacked this place looking for someone named Rizzo and they wouldn't give him up, so he poisoned them all with gas. But we got here in time to undo it, but that other guy shot him in the back and took Sanji away anyway. Because his family is the head of some supposed evil empire. But the worst thing is..." "Slow down," Ace ordered sharply, reeling from the absolute spitfire delivery of information. Nami clammed up instantly, the snail going very stiff. "Jack attacked Zo? Is he still there? Were you there when it happened?" "No, he got called away to go try and free Doflamingo from escort to impel down. We arrived afterwards," Nami responded, before a nervous tone entered her voice. "He didn't manage to do that, did he?" Ace snapped a look at Marco and Haruta. Not that we've heard, he said after they both shook their heads. So Bej took Sanji, that's your cook, right? It took a second to place the name. That was one of the worst generation, the user of the castle fruit. Yes, Nami said, looking both upset and furious at the admission. That would be bad enough, except Big Mom. She also wants to. The usually self-confident navigator trailed off, which causes Ace to ball up one hand into a fist. Wants to what? He prodded impatiently. He's already seen a trajectory of events he doesn't like. Luffy would never let anyone taking one of her crewmates from her stand. The smoking ruin where Eni's lobby used to be stood testament to that. But this wasn't a complacent judicial island she's storming, it's Linlin. Nami took in a deep breath. She wants Luffy to marry one of her sons, she mumbled in a rush. I can't understand you, Ace stated flatly. Repeat that, and slower, please. Big Mom sent a message proposing that Luffy marry her son, Nami blurted out, her voice shaking audibly. Katakori. Charlotte Katakori. The transponder snail tray slipped from Ace's numb fingers and clattered to the ground. Haruta yelped and might have berated him for not being more careful with the poor thing, but Ace couldn't hear him over the static in his ears. The sentence repeated itself in his mind mockingly as he tries to process the idea of his Lu in the clutches of Charlotte fucking Linlin, that murderous fucking monster, who ate her own children when she went on her hunger rampages. She wanted to force Lu to marry her son. The fire logia sucked in a shaky breath and forced himself to page through his emotions one at a time. To not lose his head. Rage was first, furious and familiar, because how dare that fat old hag try to get her greedy hands on Lu. Second was a violent burst of anxiety, two priorities going to war with each other, and then he forced his head to clear and spoke again. What did Lu have to say about that? Nami causes the rattled snail to make a complicated expression. She said that she's not getting married to a guy she doesn't know, so Katakori will have to court her if he wants to marry her. She said slowly, like she's afraid to say this out loud. I honestly can't tell if she's at all serious about letting him try, or if that's the cover story she's going with so we can enter Totland and get Sanji back. Ace uttered a very dried chuckle. Yeah, it can be hard to tell with her sometimes. He put a hand on his hip. Katakori, huh? And here I was thinking he was the most tolerable one of Big Mom's brood. Venomous anger flared his chest. Do you know him at all? Nami hedged uncertainly. Ace shrugged aggressively. As a person? Not really, but I can say his reputation's earned. Strong, smart enough to use that strength well, and he's mastered observation hockey enough to see short visions of the future. Both in and out of battle. You're kidding, the navigator moaned dismally. I wish. Ace responded. Thanks for contacting me, and keep pestering Sabo until he picks up. Elusive bastard might be on a mission of some sort, but he'll want to know as soon as possible. He briefly smiles at the thought of the blonde's reaction. The image gives him a brief moment of respite. I'll get back to you in a bit, I need to talk to some people. All right, Nami said, like she doesn't trust his calm-sounding reaction. There's a clicking sound as she hung up. Ace squeezed his eyes shut, his hands balling into fists. He could feel both Marco and Haruta staring nervously at him. Hey, why the sad face, Lu? Ace hopped off the edge of his first ship onto the dock, where the raven-haired girl had stopped helping him load food crates in favor of staring despondently out at the ocean waters. You were so excited to see me off yesterday. Luffy tugged on the brim of her hat, hiding her eyes from him. A slight frown crossing his face. Ace put a hand on her shoulder. I am? Luffy protested, shaking her head violently. I'm really happy for you, Ace, I'm just. She sniffled, sending a bolt of panicked alarm through the older boy. Hey, no tears. Pirates don't cry, he babbled, brushing a shimmer of a tear away. Do so, Luffy muttered just to be contrary. She'd said those very words herself whenever he'd teased her about her ability to handle things without him in the previous weeks. Unfortunately for her, repressing her emotions was not something she was good at, and she shook her head. I'm gonna miss you so much. Ace smiled, the gesture not showing just how much those words filled him with joy. You're crying like I'm going away forever, he teased, moving her hat up. Her shimmering hazel eyes focused on him, his chest squeezed at the sight, and he brushed her cheek again to urge them away. I thought you were going to chase after me into the sea. What, are you not tough enough after all this time? Don't tell me you've decided to be a housewife like Wool Slap keeps telling you to. The words have their intended effect. Luffy's mood flipped from sad to indignant instantly. That's not funny, I'm going out to sea and I'm gonna be king of the pirates. I'll catch up with you before you know it, her eyes flashed. You won't even see me coming. Ace laughed and nudges her hat back so he can ruffle her hair. She squeaked, pouting adorably at him. And his gaze drifted briefly to her full pink lips before he caught himself and shook his head. I mean it, Luffy yelled, misunderstanding the gesture. I know you will. Ace responded, dropping his hand. Once you reach the Grand Line, I'll be there waiting for you. He winked. So don't leave me hanging, okay? Luffy smiled brightly, her eyes are still shiny, and a moment later, she lunged forward and hugged him tightly. Ace uttered a quiet, woof, and wrapped his arms around her shoulders, almost afraid that she'd hear how hard his heart was pounding. Fuck, he was going to miss her. Miss her warmth, her laughter, everything. I'll miss you too, Lou, he murmured. Luffy made a happy sound and squeezed him tighter. Good luck, Ace, she murmured, before beaming at him. I love you. Ace jerked slightly in his throat. I know, he said, instead of the words he wanted to say back. He'd promised to be her brother, before he was old enough to know the forms that love could take. And what if she rejects him? You tell me all the time. You're not worried I'll forget, are you? Luffy peered up at him. Nope. Sometimes I think you don't believe me, though. I do. I really do love you, Ace. Ace's left arm melted into fire. Not bright orange flames, but brilliant white. The searing heat causes his brothers to automatically take a few steps back from him. He didn't say anything for a long moment, staring blankly at the middle distance, putting the memory away in favor of thinking on the information that Nami had given him thoroughly. Sort through the implications, work out what Big Mom's plan could be, and take stock of the Whitebeard pirate's current situation. He directed the heat toward the sky and away from the building just in case, as he thinks, keeping his flames from doing any damage. It gave his rage somewhere to go. Marco stared uneasily at Ace, and faintly swallowed. His brother and captain is glacially calm on the outside. It's eerie, because he knew it was the exact opposite of what he's feeling. For the first time he missed the times when the ReynaAtTheEnd would yell, curse and lose his temper like he used to. Underneath Ace's roiling haki, even though he knows he won't hurt him, Marco couldn't escape the faint feeling of being a bird in the grasp of a cat. Ace clenched his fist and dismisses the white flames. Where was the last time and place we saw Weevil or the traitor? He asked in a neutral tone. I'll call the fleet, Haruta responded, already dialing. Sometime later. Marriage? That tyrannical hag wants to make Lou marry one of her spawn? Sabo bellowed, prompting Ain to slap a hand over his mouth. He glanced indignantly at her. The Neo-Marine rolled her eyes and jerked a thumb over her shoulder to where the doctors were examining Kuma. Or had been. Now they were wincing and giving him wide-eyed looks. The blonde frowned and reluctantly bowed his head in apology. Ain gave him a faintly wary look and dropped her hand in a way that told him it would be back in a flash if he started shouting again. It wasn't fair. They were clear of Mary Goes, damn it. Don't scream at me, it wasn't my idea, Nami whined, the poor transponder snail mimicking her swirling eyes. They have Sanji too. Do the revolutionaries know anything about Germa 66? That moron didn't tell us he was Vinsmoke. We wouldn't have cared. But now he's getting married because of them and we're running into them blind. They're involved too, Sabo cursed, punching the deck. Damn it, he'd thought that Sanji's swirling eyebrow looked familiar somehow, but he hadn't been able to make the connection. Trying to buy favor with Big Mom, no doubt, so they can try and reconquer the North Blue. Conquer? Nami repeated, like she was hoping she'd misheard him. Judge Vinsmoke, Ain started in a low hiss, is a descendant of the family that originally held rulership of the entire North Blue Seas. Their kingdom splintered generations ago, but the world government in its infinite wisdom, her voice dripped with scorn, still recognizes his family as royal and the fleet of warships that act as the modern Germa kingdom as a member state. Nami was silent at that for a minute, which was just as well because Sabo was reciting multiplication tables inside his head to be able to think without screaming again. Oh my god, the orange-haired navigator muttered finally, sounding too exhausted to even be peeved at the revelation. I'm starting to come up with all these horrible ideas as to why Sanji-kun never talked about his past. Sabo felt a spike of warm empathy toward the former prince, which caught him by surprise. He wouldn't have thought that he and Sanji, the guy he'd punched in the face for flirting too hard with Luffy, came from such a similar place. Keep all that worry and anger reserved for when you meet Judge, he advised. It'll make dropping the lightning bolt on the bastard even more satisfying. Nami hummed thoughtfully at the idea. So, there's no way to talk Luffy out of this incredibly dangerous detour on her way to Wano. She must know that if she just says the word, I'll have Sanji extracted from Totland and back on the Sunny within the week. He'd do it in a heartbeat. Karasu has lost too many poker games to him to be able to refuse, and he'd completed their most important mission for the foreseeable future. He'd be off as soon as he passed the most dangerous information to Dragon. Of course that would require Luffy being willing to risk him going into an emperor's territory alone. He had to make the offer, however. The snail translated the longing look Nami must be wearing perfectly. Have you ever been able to talk Luffy out of anything? She asked helplessly. But I'll definitely pass it along. Maybe she'll have a last-second change of heart. Sabo heard Robin laugh gently on the other end and the snail started pouting. I can hope. Sabo chuckled softly, understanding her feelings. I'll have our people in the East Blue put their ears to the ground, he told the snail. Big Mom's tea party invitations come with a caveat. If you ever fail to make it there for any reason, she sends her minions to find someone you love to cut their head off and put it in a box. Nami inhaled sharply. Barati, she said, understanding instantly. So that's the restaurant he worked at, Sabo confirmed. The snail nodded vigorously. Good, that cuts out any time wasted on searching. I'll let Ivankov know to watch out for rats poking around Kambaka as well, and local sympathizers in the waters around the rest of your homes will be on the alert for both Germa and Linlin's goons. You are a saint. An actual saint, not those world noble bastards. Nami told him, sounding like she was slumping in relief. You won't get in trouble spending the revolutionaries' time and resources helping a pirate crew, will you? Sabo scoffed. We'll keep its respect. And besides, anyone who complains about that can take it up with Dragon, or my pipe. Of course, I don't know what I was expecting. Aang smiled faintly, amused. Sabo was entirely predictable when it came to Monkey D. Luffy. Koala had mixed opinions on the matter. Ever since the Neo-Marines and Revolutionaries had started a partnership, she'd found herself on missions with the twosome fairly frequently, and she'd say she knew them pretty well by now. The moment Luffy entered the equation, Sabo's priorities swiveled to her. Irrational guilt over his amnesia played a part, sure, but sometimes Aang wondered. And while Dragon didn't quite show it outright, she knew from her sensei who had been ensuring that every CP0 agent sent after Luffy over the 2 years she'd been in seclusion training either came up with nothing or vanished into the ocean without a trace. The man was a distant father, probably by necessity, but he was still the young pirate's father, and he guarded her like a mythical dragon guarded his treasure. I won't be able to head to Whole Cake Island straight away, Sabo was warning the navigator when she came out of her thoughts. We're wrapping up our most recent mission and can't afford to be complacent about it. But once I'm able I'll be on my way. Is there a signal we should look out for? Nami asked. Nah, just bide your time, I'll come find you. It's safer that way, Sabo responded with a slight shake of his head. Tell Luffy to be careful with Katakori. He's the closest to having a soul out of most of that brood, sure, but he's his mother's enforcer first and foremost. The snail nodded vigorously. Thank you, Sabo. Robin's warm voice sounded from the other side of the line. I know this isn't exactly convenient for you. It's for Lu, Sabo said with a shake of his head. Don't worry about it, his brow furrowed. Before I forget, does Ace know? Yeah, I called him first. He hung up before he lost his temper. Nami sounded a little grateful and a little terrified of what he's planning. Sabo clicked his tongue. Let me worry about that. I'll talk to him in case he needs an infusion of common sense. And to coordinate. Tell Lu to be careful and that I'll be right with her. And if that seamstress is making her a dress, it better look divine. The snail blinked rapidly. Okay, Nami sounded a little dumbfounded, but Sabo knew that he had his priorities in order no matter what anyone told him. I won't keep you any longer, then. Luffy will be sorry she missed you. Tell her I'll see her soon. Sabo responded lightly. A few polite exchanges later and he hung up. The blonde sucked in a deep breath, then vaulted to his feet and started cursing under his breath, stalking back and forth with his hands behind his back. Aang watched him move, rather wishing that Koala was here. That old hag thinks one of her brats is worthy of Lu, does she? Sabo seethed. The world's in luck, she's going senile at a rapid pace. Who the hell does she think she is? A Yonko. Who's used to getting what she wants? Aang deadpanned, bemused. Yeah, well not this time. Sabo growled, his fists shimmering with hockey. Hell will freeze over before I let her turn Luffy into one of her long-suffering in-laws. He froze at the edge of the clearing, his heart completely in his throat. For a moment he almost couldn't recognize the slender waif of a teenager curled up among the roots of a great tree, looking tired and discomforted, as the cute, bratty little girl who'd chased him and Ace through the jungle until she'd wormed her way into their lives. The difference was jarring, and it painfully drove home just how much he'd missed, how much his amnesia had stolen from them. Sucking in a deep breath, he walked up to the tree. Hey Lu, breakfast isn't gonna catch itself. He tried. If you keep sleeping in, Ace and I will keep all the tiger meat to ourselves. Those half-closed hazel eyes snapped open instantly. No, my tiger, she shrieked on autopilot before her eyes registered who she was looking at, and indignation melted into confusion. Wait. What? She stared up at him, at the familiar top hat and goggles settled on blonde hair. Blue eyes, one shaded by a sizable burn scar. She knew that face. She did. She had missed it so much, her mind spun, and she slowly shrank back into the tree, much to his dismay. Oh. I'm dreaming, she mumbled. Why? Sabo asked softly. Because you're gone, Luffy responded insistently, her voice tiny and fragile. You died. Dogra saw you get. She bites her bottom lip, tears forming in her eyes. He saw my little ship get fired on by a celestial dragon, Sabo confirmed, watching her eyes grow even wider. Who else knew that, after all? Turns out those spineless bastards can't shoot for shit. He burned half my face and almost drowned me when I passed out and my boat collapsed, but he didn't kill me. Your dad fished me out of the water and patched me up, made me a revolutionary. I'm right here, Lu. That's not funny, Luffy said, her voice getting a little shaky with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and budding hope. You would have come home if you hadn't died. The statement felt like a knife in his chest. God, he wished that he had, that he'd bypassed his gut instinct about Goa and looked just a little longer to make sure he wasn't leaving anything behind. I would have if I hadn't taken a head injury. It gave me amnesia, I forgot everything about my life. He sucked in a shaky breath, tears prickling at his eyes. Until I saw you. It's me, Lu. Sabo. Luffy slowly sat up, and stared deeply into his eyes. Searching for any sign of deceit, the light of the sun burning into him as she catalogued every inch of his face and compared him to her memories. Sabo swallowed minutely, silently pleading that she'd believed him. The longest moment of his life ticked on until Luffy's expression softened, and then lit up like the new dawn. Tears spilled down her cheeks, joyous and disbelieving, and Luffy tackled him so hard he was flung several feet back before landing on his back in the grass with a thud. Sabo, she cried, burying her face in his chest and hugging him like a python. Sabo wheezed, the air knocked out of his lungs, not that he cared. He hugged her back as hard as he could. Sabo, you're alive, you came back. Sabo closed his eyes briefly, then flexed his fists and scowling out at the ocean. Yeah, he muttered darkly. Linlin's days are numbered. Murderous bitch shouldn't have targeted Lu if she wanted to keep her head. You think that's possible now? Aang asked. The Marines didn't manage to kill Whitebeard, and his health was worse than hers currently is. Sabo glanced sideways at her and smirked. Trust me, are you sure we can't make it a little roomier? Luffy asked, twisting from side to side and watching the skirt of her dress swoosh around her ankles. I can probably fight in this, but it'll be harder to kick than usual. The cheetah mink seamstress shook her head, somewhere between amused and exasperated with a hint of existential dread. I've done my best, Luffy-chan, but dresses aren't meant for fighting. She zipped up the back, causing Luffy to blink and roll her shoulders. They had spent about 2 hours struggling with the top half of the dress, or, The seamstress Aila had been struggling while Luffy obliviously complained over and over that she needed more range of movement. Wedding dresses were a complex creation at the best of times, but sizing and creating one for a pirate who was rather expecting her potential wedding to devolve into a brawl. Well, thankfully for poor Aila's nerves, Nami and Robin had quickly joined her in her efforts and vetoed some of Luffy's more interesting requests for her dress, such as multiple snack pockets. The Ravenette had adamantly declined a veil, saying she wouldn't wear anything but her hat and wasn't going to attach anything to it. Nami kind of despaired at the realization that Luffy honestly considered Roger's keepsake as proper wedding attire. She was impressed, though, that her constantly energetic captain had somehow managed to endure the hours of the dress being assembled. Granted, Luffy had occasionally fallen dead asleep in the chair, forcing her and Robin to hold her up and pose her while the seamstress and her assistants worked, but she hadn't thrown any tantrums about being bored or made any escape attempts. By her standards, that was an incredible show of restraint. By marrying someone, you're promising to be with them forever, Luffy had said when Nami expressed disbelief at this. If you don't approach it seriously, why would anyone believe your promise is real? I didn't realize you'd given this that much thought, Nami admitted after a few seconds, blinking rapidly at her. Granted, the whole thing had still been a struggle. Luffy understood very little about clothing and its making, so she had no problem asking for outrageous things and not understanding why it gave Aila and her crew hives. Robin's steady presence helped the process along, and Nami had snapped early on and decided to dig into her own closet for outfits for Luffy so they won't be trapped in this building for weeks. The results were quite remarkable, though. Luffy's wedding dress is a thing of beauty, floor-length, sleeveless, a neckline that emphasizes her femininity without being too generous, and the layered skirt embroidered with golden suns and flowers was straight out of a fairy tale. Luffy beamed, swirling in a circle. Well? Aila prompted, admirably not sounding completely exhausted. It's great. Luffy exulted happily, bouncing on her heels. The cheetah mink immediately collapses into her chair in relief and her assistants cheer like they just won a war. Shishishishi. It's so comfy. Oh, too bad Makino isn't here to see it, maybe I'll have Usopp take some pictures. You do look amazing, Luffy. Nami admitted, a little awed. She hadn't thought that anything could make Luffy look like a bride rather than the tomboy she was, but the orange-haired girl had attacked the dress up with all her energy, but she still hadn't really expected much more than making her cute. Not divine. I'm almost glad Sanji isn't here, she admitted silently. He'd faint and stay unconscious for days. I just need to find the right necklace and it'll be perfect. I agree, Robin said lightly. You should dress up more often, Luffy. I'm sure our crewmates would be rather impressed with the results. Nami laughed dryly. Yeah. Impressed, lowering her voice to a hiss, she leaned over to the archaeologist and whispered. Are you trying to kill Zoro and Sanji? Robin gave her a picture-perfect innocent smile at that. Do not mess up my betting pool, which, I've got a fortune riding on this. Luffy blinked rapidly at Robin. Pirates don't wear dresses, she laughed, shaking her head. This is a special exception. She hopped up down from the changing platform, a bright smile on her face. I can't wait to show Zoro and Trafi. Nami fumbled with her drink and spilled half of it on her boot. Cursing virulently, she gave Luffy a wide-eyed look. The dress is part of the plan, yeah? Luffy asked, blinking at her. I want to show Trafi that I'm taking the plan seriously. And I need Zoro's opinions. Oh, and I want to show Usopp and Frankie before they go too. That sounds like a fine idea, Robin said while Nami tried to regain her composure. Shall we give the boys a call and have them come to you? Best we not get the dress dirty before we've even pushed off Zo, after all. Luffy looked down at her outfit as if seeing it for the first time. Yeah, that would probably be smart. She admitted casually. And Nami resisted the urge to throttle her at the implication that she would have run out to the sunny if Robin hadn't been quick on the draw. Aila looked like she might faint. Robin smiled serenely and pulled out a baby den while Luffy whirled in a circle again, seemingly enraptured. I'm still surprised you gave marriage much thought, Nami remarked when she'd marginally calmed down. I wouldn't have thought I'm going to be king of the pirates was the type. Makino told me a lot of fairy tales about princesses and adventurers when I was little, Luffy said, testing a curtsy. She wobbles and almost falls flat on her back at the deeply uncharacteristic movement, snickering at herself. I didn't care much for the whole locked in the tower thing. Nobody would ever be able to do that to Shanks. But what I did like was that Makino always said that marrying someone they loved made the princess happy forever. Luffy tilted her hat up and gave Nami a little smile. A bit more serious than her usual, but equally sincere. Doesn't that sound amazing? You were never worried that no one would want to marry a pirate? Nami asked. Shanks was there when Roger and Rogue got married, Luffy responded, unfazed. He told me all about it. Right, your pirate dad. Nami's smile grew a little strained. I don't suppose you're planning to tell him about this, maybe marriage, of yours? Luffy blinked rapidly. Huh, I hadn't thought. Well, I'm supposed to meet him again when I'm a great pirate and give him his hat back. Now she had her thinking face on, which Nami isn't sure if she's worried or hopeful. Maybe, she smiled at the thought. It would be cool if he was there. But he's probably busy with his territory, huh? The door swung open, admitting Chopper, Usopp, Momonosuke, Brook and Frankie. Luffy pivoted to face them, beamed, and bowed, lifting her skirt just like all the pictures from Makino's book. Hey guys, do I look like a bride? She asked them cheerfully. Usopp's mouth unhinged and dropped to the ground. Chopper gasped in awe, Momo's eyes grew really wide before he blushed red as a tomato, and Brook literally collapsed into a pile of bones, his skull pink in the cheeks. Wow, big sis, Chopper blurted out. You look so beautiful. Who are you and what have you done with Luffy? Usopp whispered in disbelief. Was this delicate, beautiful flower his captain and best friend? What sorcery was this? Had someone cast a spell on her? Sure, Luffy usually dressed in boys' clothes that were practical instead of flattering, but still. What's that supposed to mean? Luffy asked, confused and a little indignant. Usopp flailed a little, too afraid to explain and still too surprised to speak anyway. Wow, little sis. Frankie laughed, patting her on the head. She practically disappeared under his large hand without protest, a little giggle escaping her lips. You look mighty fine in that, I'm impressed. Well done, ladies, Brook said from the floor. Our captain has never looked more radiant. What are you all yell a change of clothes, Zoro grumbled as he walked into the room, still carrying a crate of food. Law trailed right behind him, muttering something about how ridiculous this was since she wasn't going to get married. Usopp had been standing in his line of vision. The sharpshooter yelped in terror at the sound of his voice and leapt out of the way. Zoro set eyes on Luffy and dropped the crate on his foot. His eyes widened into discs and he stared speechlessly at the Ravenet, who stopped making any sound under the intensity of his gaze. The swordsman's mouth went completely dry. Beautiful. The hot spike of desire that swamped him in an instant was familiar, but more powerful than ever before. He wanted to take her into his arms and entreat her to choose him. Tell her everything he'd tried to convey ever since that day in the dusty yards of Shell's town. Zoro, you dropped the food. Luffy cried, scandalized. Her swordsman kept staring at her, like he was in a trance, and the girl felt her cheeks heat up intensely along with her heart suddenly beating like a fleeing rabbit. A sound that might have been Nika snickering echoed in her ears. Zoro. He's never seen you in anything but boys' clothes. Has he? Law asked, drawing her attention to him. How the man was capable of speaking, he wasn't sure. His sun goddess was drowning out the whole world. It would be so easy to shamble her into his arms and kiss her. He'd half raised one hand to do exactly that. Damn how many people were watching when the moment was shattered. Luffyheim, you're so pretty, Momonosuke cheered, running up to her and jumping up to hug her. Luffy grinned and wrapped her arms around him, lifting him off his feet. The young boy immediately buried his face in her ample chest, his childish crush on his rescuer amplified by budding adolescence and a lewd boldness. The death glares that pierced him from behind. Well, how the kid didn't drop dead on the spot Usopp couldn't figure out. A black aura that dimmed the light around Zoe swirled around Zoro and Law, livid at the little brat taking advantage of Luffy's obliviousness like this and wondering if they could get away with turning the would-be shogun into a pile of talking limbs. Thanks Momo, Luffy said cheerfully, promptly dropping Momo on the ground. The boy yipped in disappointment. Her sense of balance restored, she waved at Law. "What do you think, Trafi?" "Wah?" The surgeon of death stuttered a question, snapping out of his rage fit in an instant. "Of the dress. It suits you," he managed lamely. Zoro chuckled mockingly, causing him to snap a glare at him. "Good," Luffy said, a little bewildered. Nami wordlessly walked over to the wall and started knocking her head against it. "This is all I needed. Now that I look like a bride, Big Mom will definitely think I'm gonna marry Cat no matter what." She turned to Zoro. "I gotta talk to you for a second, Zoro, about going to Wano. Just give me a sec to change back." Zoro nodded jerkily. He wouldn't be able to focus on anything she said while in that dress anyway. The seducing woods were avoided by even the most daring of Totland's citizens, which included many of Big Mom's own children. Only the most powerful among the officers went there for any reason, which made it perfect for the purposes of Charlotte Katakori, who was just about sick of his siblings screaming about his upcoming wedding. The tall man sat alone on the edges of the water, a pile of newspapers sitting next to him while he paged through the exposé on the Straw Hats' raiding of Eni's lobby. Katakori read through the descriptions of the crew's assault on the judicial island and snorted in annoyance. Trying to get actual information to analyze mixed in with the slurry of propaganda and blatant lies the world government peddled was harder than finding sea stone in a sky island. But it was the only source of information on his now fiancée he could get his hands on. Within the paragraphs trying to portray her as some sort of diabolical mastermind, around the same time they'd given Marshal D. Teach a warlord position. If he remembers correctly, Katakori picked up that the only reason that Luffy had attacked the island was because they had kidnapped her archaeologist. "Do what you want with the world, I just want Robin back." Usually it was his mother or Newgate or Kaido, who leveled entire islands when someone they put value on was taken. That girl had only been sailing for 6 months, yet she challenged the entire world government and succeeded. She was described as a wild card and a viciously unpredictable danger. There were rumors that she was the one who had defeated Crocodile, not Commodore Smoker, only several weeks before that. She had destroyed the Marine's attempt to execute Roger's son, and she was the holder of the human fruit model, Nika. Loyal to and protective of her crew. Aside from that, Katakori couldn't figure out exactly who Monkey D. Luffy was. "So this is where you've been brooding?" Katakori uttered a faint irritated sound at his sister's voice. Brulee strolled out of the seducing woods and sat down next to him, making a face when she saw the newspapers. "You weren't expecting to get any decent information out of the government's rag, were you?" "It would be a reprieve from knowing nothing," Katakori responded shortly, not looking at her. "Don't you have wedding preparations to work on, Brulee?" Now, is that any way to speak to someone who's worried about you?" Brulee said. Katakori stared straight ahead. "It's strange to see you caught so flat-footed." "I'm not." "Oh yes, that's why you're cribbing the government's notes on your bride-to-be and snapping at anyone who tries to talk to you about your engagement." Katakori twitched, and tossed the newspaper aside. "Why is mother marrying me off now? We have brothers closer to the girl's age. Ones who don't." He violently shook his hand in front of his scarf-covered mouth. Have this to disgust and horrify her. She'd never want to touch him, once she'd seen his mouth. And how long could he conceal it from her in the first place? Up until the wedding, if he was lucky. His hands balled into fists, frustrated, and angry that he'd let himself believe that his mother wouldn't ever try to marry him off. He'd avoided the subject as much as possible and hoped, as he'd gotten older, that she would focus on his sweeter, more attractive siblings to hook allies. And why did it have to be that girl? "Nonsense," Brulee said sharply. "There is nothing wrong with you." "In your entirely unbiased opinion?" Katakori asked, though his tone was tired, not biting. "She's a fool if it disturbs her," his sister retorted spiritedly. "You're everything a man should be. You're a protector, a warrior, you never lose. Why wouldn't she want to marry you?" Katakori didn't say anything, frowning. "Yes, Nika would be so pleased to be forced into a subservient role in our pirate crew. Can't mama see that this won't get her what she wants? Mother never asked me if I wanted to marry this strange girl. Perhaps I don't wish to marry at all?" Brulee sighed and put a hand on his arm. "She never asks any of us that," she acknowledged. "We do everything we can for her because she gave us life and protects us. You knew that." She bumped his shoulder, something she hadn't done since they were children. How bad could it be, Katakori? Haven't you seen how happy Praline is with her new husband? She is, Katakori admitted, slightly begrudgingly. He'd watched the sun pirate like a hawk after the honeymoon. But he's never been anything but a perfect partner for his sister. But I am not her. Of course he's not coming out to town. Oven laughed, very amused at the idea. Katakori's face is so horrifying he couldn't even buy a woman. Cracker burst into a howling fit of laughter. And Katakori resisted the urge to do any more than twitch his fingers. The only thing worse than this brother's insults was the fact that they were right. Brulee was definitely frowning now, and Katakori knows that he's the reliable one. He needed to be the one she leaned on, not the other way around. You haven't met the girl yet, she offered. She might be alright. Her crew must suspect why Mother is making the offer. Katakori said. Perhaps they won't come. Fire First would take them in if they made for his territory. Brulee scoffed. That child? Mama would crush him. Don't be so overconfident. Katakori rolled his eyes. Didn't you see what happened to the Marines when they presumed that they couldn't possibly fail? He was captured and strung up in the yard like some paradise pirate. His family had to come and save him. He's just another cocky logia who got the captaincy because he was Whitebeard's favorite, Brulee said scornfully. He was captured by Marshal D. Teach. Katakori retorted, annoyed at her attitude. How do you fancy your chances in a one-on-one fight against that freak? A freak who used to be your brother, who you trusted unconditionally? Brulee felt tellingly silent. He won't have a mental block like that fighting us, I assure you. Fire Fist. The man Luffy had nearly sacrificed her body, mind, and life to save without hesitation. Her desperation to rescue him so powerful she awakened her fruit. Something twinged in Katakori's chest, an ugly feeling he didn't know how to describe, and he ruthlessly squashed it and put it from his mind. The girl doesn't seem to be the type to run, not when her cook is here, he acknowledged, before Brulee could read anything into his expression. She, among all his siblings, was the one who knew him best. But we have to at least consider it. True, Brulee said after a few moments of silence. But I'm not worried. Nothing will get past you, big brother. Katakori exhaled slowly, his scarf hiding a small smile. As exhausting as his routine is, as draining as maintaining this facade of perfection was on him, to protect her and his other siblings, it was worth it. Chiffon is screaming, pleading, and he bolted toward her voice, down the hall and into the room where his sister is being beaten black and blue. When he saw her assailant, he staggered to a stop instinctively. He stood there for a moment, frozen, Chiffon seeing him and pleading him with her eyes. Help me, you always protect us, why are you just standing there, please? He moved forward and reached out to the assailant's arm, without a plan and moving entirely on instinct, and then. How dare you Katakori's breath hitched, and a phantom shiver of pain ran down his arm. He flexed his hand instinctively, chasing the memory away. Do we know when the girl will be here? He asked, his calm firmly in place in an instant. We haven't heard from her, Brulee admitted, but she won't keep Mama waiting long. Katakori nodded in agreement. He wondered how long he had until he would be face to face with the sun goddess. This strange, unbalanced feeling. Would it go away once he met her? Perhaps then he could properly square her away as an asset or an opponent. Perhaps once she raged at them for taking her cook and rejected them from the outset, he'd realize how much he'd been overthinking things. Yes. Surely that would be it. She wouldn't get close enough to even want to see his face. He'd never have to wonder if maybe she might be odd enough to know he wasn't a child anymore. Stay in contact with us, alright? Zoro asked Luffy, watching as the Sunny and the Tang finished their final travel preparations. Be discreet about it, but whatever goes wrong, I want to know about it. Luffy nodded confidently. She's back in her usual red cardigan and shorts, and she looked slightly more serious than usual, fully understanding that she wouldn't have her trusty first mate at her back for this adventure made her a little uneasy. I know. Nami's in charge of the snails, she said, because she knows she forgets things like this, but the orange-haired girl won't. Then she pivoted slightly to the other man and said, Kine, I'm trusting you with my nakama. Make sure the plans go smoothly, and take care of Momo. Kinemon bowed deeply. You have my word, Luffyheim. We will be waiting for your and Sanji-san's arrival. This wild girl had done the impossible, She'd given him hope. When he'd seen her determination, her ferocity, the depths of Nika's powers, he truly believed that defeating the monstrous Kaido was possible. Luffy clapped her hands together, a beaming smile on her face. Zoro's heart twisted itself into a familiar knot. Great, thanks. We'll be there before you know it. Kinemon nodded and hurried off to speak with Beppo and Law. Zoro looked his captain up and down. He'd been with her the longest, her first crewmate. He could read her better than almost anyone. Luffy couldn't shake of that little bit of concern she felt for them as the crew separated. It was because of Kuma and how he'd forcefully split them up 2 years ago. Luffy had forgiven him for it now, knew he had done it to make them ready for the new world on Dragon's orders, and he had protected the Sunny in their absence, but for a girl whose greatest fear was being alone, the separation had been traumatic. It had never shaken her confidence in them, only in herself and what might happen if she wasn't there to protect them. Zoro had been sorely tempted to take Kuma apart and turn him into a stereo system when he realized this. "You're worrying too much," he told her. "Hey, I'm not worried." "Sure." Zoro rolled his eyes before putting a hand on her slender shoulder. "Robin will make sure none of us are conspicuous. We'll be discreetly connecting with any Kazuki loyalists and getting the lay of the land. The beast pirates won't think anything of it." Luffy dropped her arms to her sides. "I know," she said. "Trafi told me a couple of times." Zoro took in a breath so he could say something he didn't want to. "Well, try to listen to him as much as you can in Totland, please?" he asked. Law was an adept strategist. He can admit that, even if it felt like nudging her closer to him. Big Mom won't be like anyone we've fought before. She has the same level of power as Whitebeard. You remember what he could do, don't you? Of course I do, Luffy said, sounding a little offended. Uncle Ed is so cool. Zoro almost wished he could have been a fly on the wall the first time Luffy had no doubt casually called the strongest man in the world that mid-conversation. Just don't let you guard down, Zoro said, knowing that asking her to be careful was pointless. Luffy smiled and bobbled her head. I won't. She stepped closer and peered at his face, her brow furrowing. Are you worried, Zoro? Worried? Me? He scoffed, trying to sound insulted. Luffy giggled in response, her eyes sparkling like she'd just heard an inside joke. His heart skipped a beat when she shot forward and hugged him tightly, looping her arms around him. Her slid one arm around her waist, inhaling her scent. He didn't know how long they would be apart. 2 years had been agonizing. When he'd returned, he'd sworn that nothing would ever make him leave her side again. The hunger snarling in his stomach was torture. He'd gone without eating for periods of time between bounties, but never for this long. Zoro silently cursed that spoiled bastard's cowardice and threatening the little girl and her mother. His head throbbed painfully and his throat was on fire. The heat of the sun beat down on him with unforgiving intensity. The last time he'd had any comfort was a night or so ago. The girl's mother had made a habit of creeping into the yard under the cover of darkness and bringing water cans from him to drink from. She was grateful for his sacrifice, and lamented that this was all that she could do for him in return. He'd snorted and told her not to lose sleep. He met this challenge with sheer stubbornness. The brat was going to have to do worse than this if he wanted to kill him. His promise to Kuina was all the food he needed. He dozed off a lot. That morning he was roused from a half-sleep by a ladder clacking against the stone wall. Bemusedly he half-lifted, hiking her way into the yard. A boy was yelling at her to come back, only to utter a full shriek of alarm when a red figure easily vaulted the wall and followed after Rika. Hey, a cheerful girl's voice rung gently in his ears like a church bell. Is that food for him? Huh? Rika glanced up at her. Yeah, I made it myself. Big brother got in trouble for helping me. Oh, the girl hummed. Kobe says there's a sign saying nobody's allowed in the yard. How about I go bring the rice balls to him? Since I'm a pirate, I'm already in trouble, and you won't have to be. Oh, you would? Thank you, Oni-san. Thank goodness, the boy gasped. Come here, girl. I'll pull you back up. Footsteps come towards him as the silly girl was hauled out of the yard and out of danger. And Zoro permitted himself to look up. His breath caught in his throat. The girl in the straw hat smiled brightly at him, her hazel eyes amused and curious. She's dressed in boy's clothes, a red vest and short blue shorts. She's long-limbed and muscular and perfectly formed from her toes to the feathery black hair that framed her heart-shaped face. There's a scar under her eye that stretched a little with her smile. A sign that she was a fighter, that she was fearless. Zoro had never felt anything towards a woman before. His goal consumed his whole being. Yet the only word his stunned mind could cobble together was beautiful. He'd never seen anything so beautiful in his life. "You're Roronoa, Zoro?" the girl asked him, a little giggle spilling from her lips. She, I didn't think I'd find you all tied up like this. You're a scary demon, aren't you?" Zoro rested his face in her hair. He wanted to go with her so badly, but he can't. They can't afford to forget about Kaido, and Law and Kinemon's plan didn't have much room for error. "That cook better not give you any trouble when you get there," he muttered, remembering Robin in CP9. She. Luffy giggled into his neck. "Silly Zoro. You worry too much." "You don't worry enough," Zoro groused, before releasing her and making himself take a step back. If he doesn't do it now, he wouldn't be able to. "I'll see you in Wano." Luffy looked like she wanted to go for another hug. "See you, Zoro." Luffy hated not having Sanji on the Sunny. Hated it. It's not that Nami is a bad cook, far from it. She's the only one keeping them alive when Luffy's own attempts at cooking had been not quite passable. Peckham's was with them, but he couldn't cook either, and Nami's food was really nice but it wasn't the same. Luffy would sneak into the kitchen in the middle of the night for a snack, and she'd be halfway into a bowl of fruit before she remembered that Sanji wasn't going to come in to scold her. The realization made her wilt a little. She kept looking for her cook at odd hours, even though she knew he wasn't present. It stung, and she could tell she wasn't the only one. Nami kept glancing at the stairway like she expected him to climb up them any moment, her drink in hand and over-the-top compliment on his lips. Luffy had wandered over to her and flopped down in the chair next to her, so they could mutually sulk over his absence until Brook played a jaunty tune to cheer them up. The absence gnawed away at the back of Luffy's mind. It reminded her of when Vivi had chosen to stay behind with her people. She'd expected it, but having to leave her behind really sucked. Except this feeling was even stronger, impossible to set aside for long, and she knew she'd never feel right on the Sunny unless Sanji came back. He wouldn't leave, would he, if he really wanted to marry Miss Pudding? A funny, angry squeezing feeling filled Luffy's chest when she unwillingly pondered the possibility. It really hurt. Why did it hurt so much? Sanji wouldn't leave, he wouldn't. She resolutely rejected the idea and tried to think about other things. "I wonder what Sanji's family is like," Luffy pondered, casting her fishing line back into the water. It had been several days since they left Zou for Totland, and they were running somewhat low on food. Peckham's was handling navigation since he was the one who knew the way, and Nami was handling cooking. Brook was playing a light tune, looking up at the clear blue sky. The mercurial weather of the New World was giving them a break for now. Aside from the heat, it's scorching, and if Law hadn't insisted on packing all the extra food, they'd be suffering even worse right now. Luffy reminded herself to give him a big hug as soon as she managed to fish up something. He mentioned he was born in the North Blue a long time ago, Chopper remembered, but he didn't say anything else. "You're right," Luffy realized, recalling the time they spent with Cricket on Jaya. He grew up with Old Man Zeph, but he never talked about anything before that. Did he get in a fight with them before he went to the East Blue? Chopper shook his head, looking up at her. Maybe. Her doctor looked out at the water, troubled. If he didn't mention them even once. "I mean, you were happy to talk about your grandpa, even though you were always fighting with him about not wanting to be a Marine." Luffy blinked rapidly. "Grandpa loves me, and I love him. He's just a stubborn old man," she said in confusion. Chopper nodded. "Exactly, even though you argue with him, there's so much love between you. If they were good to Sanji, wouldn't he have said something about them? If Germa really is some kind of evil empire, Sanji might not have liked them at all." The little reindeer grimaced, staring worriedly at the water. He couldn't help but remember how his herd had rejected him all those years ago, leaving him behind and chasing him away when he tried to follow them. "I hope he's okay right now." Luffy twitched, her mind unwillingly settling on the idea. Her memories of Goa and the nobles she'd met there reared their ugly heads. How Sabo had hated his noble parents, how they crushed his spirit and treated him like a commodity meant to bring them more wealth and status, sent pirates to tear him away from her and Ace. Sanji's family was royalty. Unless his father was like Vivi's. He'd better be, she muttered lowly, her fingers tightening like a vice around her fishing line. Rage pulsed through her. I won't let them hurt him. Brook wound his song to a close and glanced sideways at Law. The deadly doctor was sitting in one of the lawn chairs under the shade of Nami's tangerine trees, his head in a newspaper. Pedro and Carrot were both not so subtly trying to read over his shoulder in hopes of distracting themselves from the heat. Trafalgar-san, the skeleton inquired, you grew up in the North Blue. Have you ever encountered Germa 66? Not in person, Law said with manufactured casualness, his eyes laser-focused on the Sora, warrior of the sea strips he'd located from the Sunny's stores. The strips involved Sora's clashes with the seductive and eerie Poison Pink, who's threatened to poison an entire island if they didn't surrender to her father. The comics depicted her as the most competent of the Rangers and the most dangerous to Sora, who was unwillingly attracted to her and admired her relative morals compared to her vicious brothers. In this strip, the Poison Pink was using was time delayed, giving Sora the room he needed to synthesize an antidote in time to rescue the civilians. While her brothers threw an angry fit, Pink just laughed and praised Sora's resourcefulness. She was Law's favorite character in the comics after Sora himself. And she's the cook's sister. He's going to meet her, in person, relatively soon. Excitement bubbles furiously in his chest. Law swallowed hard and noted that everyone was looking his way now. I did hear plenty about them, though. It's unavoidable. They're an army of mercenaries and conquerors. They've ended civil wars over the course of a single night, and they have precious little in the way of scruples. They're sufficiently prominent enough that they're a favorite go-to villain for the Marine comics. You mean like this one you're reading? Carrot asked innocently. I'm researching, Law said a little too quickly. Luffy glanced his way, hazel eyes wide and curious, and he forces down a hot flustered feeling. If Sanji is the fifth member of the Vinsmoke family, they won't be keen on releasing him back to us after reclaiming him. Well, that's just too bad, Luffy burst out, indignant and nearly dropping her fishing line. Chopper yelped and saved it with his feet. Sanji is our cook. If he doesn't want to stay with them, he's coming home with us. Naturally, Law responded calmly, turning the page over. I need to know what to expect from them when this turns into a fight, however. While Sora is a fictional hero, all of his exploits are based in part upon the victories of real Marines. It stands to reason that the abilities that Germa demonstrates in the comics are real as well, so I'm refreshing my memory. When? Don't you mean if? Chopper asked nervously. Law gave his fellow doctor a very deadpan look. Honestly, that kind of question is that. The little zone should be used to the new world by now. Germa is a bastion of science. Their king, Vinsmoke Judge, used to be a research partner of Vegapunk's. That name again, Nami mumbled, wiping sweat from her forehead. Frankie had spent 2 years on his home islands, and Caesar Clown had whined enough about the mysterious doctor for them to get an idea of what he was capable of. God, if he's anything like Caesar Clown. I doubt it. Law responded dryly. Running a country, even a nomadic one that solely exists on the back of ships, requires a degree of competence. So Sanji's family has a comic book about them? Of course, that all that Luffy got out of his debriefing. Is it any good? Law dropped the paper in his lap with a snap. Good? He demanded, indignant. It's only the best, the most popular and well-written serialization to come out of the North Blue. What could you name that's better than Sora, warrior of the sea? There's a second of stunned silence at his outburst, which allows Law's mind to catch up with his mouth. Most of her crew is staring at him in blank-faced shock, because they associated a lot of words with him, but Fanboy was definitely and pivoted toward him, her eyes brightening. Oh, you're a big fan, Trafi? She said, excited to discover this new thing about him. And it's just what I've heard, Law deflected, badly. When Carrot started to giggle, he shot her a warning glare. You are? Luffy beamed, because she's a demon, not a goddess. Hey, can I read them? Which part do you like the best? I can start there. You read? Nami asked blankly. Luffy jerked backward and gave her navigator an injured look. Hey, I like books and stuff. Ben gave me good ones when I was little. Instantly her sparkling eyes were back on Law. Please, Trafi, please? Later, focus on fishing, will you? Law retorted. His cheeks were burning now. a thump echoing in his ears at the thought of the Ravenet girl cuddled up to his side, reading the comics he'd enjoyed for years with him. The thought is so intoxicating he didn't dare give her anything resembling a straight answer in public. Luffy was about to pout and press him further when she was nearly yanked clear off the sunny and into the boiling sea below. She yelped and grabbed onto the railing, her fishing line pulling her toward the fish she'd unwittingly hitched. "Luffy!" Chopper yelped, immediately switching into heavy point and grabbing her around the waist. "Hang on, you've hooked something." "Whoa, it's a really big one," Luffy yelped, frantically trying to reel in the catch. Pedro and Carrot bolted over to her to help Chopper keep her on the sunny. "Nami, I got lunch." "Don't fall into the water," Nami yelled in concern. Law vaulted out of his chair and they both head over to the railing. Fortunately for their nerves, the Minks and Zone have a firm hold on Luffy, and together they haul aboard a gigantic fish with a glistening, solid-colored skin. "Woohoo!" Luffy cheered, tossing her line aside and running in a circle around the fish. "Look at the size of it, it was perfect for a single dinner." "I'm impressed that fish could survive in water like this," Pedro remarked, one hand on his sword as he eagerly takes their catch in. Law heaved in a deep breath. "Of course you'd catch one with poisonous skin," he said dryly, having almost instantly recognized the fish. One of the first things he'd done after finding himself on his own was memorizing what kinds of fish and land beasts that were safe to eat. How many times had he needed to upbraid Shachi and Penguin when they fished up something dangerous for dinner? "Eh, you say something, Trafi?" Luffy asked cluelessly, already peeling off some of the skin and happily chowing down on it. "Poison," Nami and Chopper roared in concert, naturally a few seconds too late to maybe stop her. Law sputtered a flood of angry imprecations and immediately shambled Luffy into his arms. The Ravenet yipped to suddenly find herself horizontal and looking up at those livid, exasperated golden eyes as she's laid out on the grass. "Trafi?" She started in confusion, her doe-like hazel eyes widening. Her cheeks warmed up a little stuttered breath escaping her at the position she was relative to him. "You promised you were going to listen to me," Law dragged out, pinning her with a look. "Room," the familiar blue sphere formed around him and her, and he pushed her down by the shoulder when she tried to sit up. "That fish has poisonous skin. Only the meat is safe for consumption after grilling." He reached into his coat for his tools. Luffy blinked rapidly at him. "Oh," she says, before attempting to reassure him, "it's okay, Trafi. Poison has no effect on me, Warden Guy saw to that." Law's gold eyes burned hotly into her in response. He scolded her constantly, but this time Luffy felt a little abashed. Something about that exasperated expression felt different from before. "You don't have an immunity to poison, you have a built-up tolerance, and you are not going to tempt fate over a goddamn lunch, now hold still." Luffy nodded obediently, looking up at the sky as Law opened her chest and stomach, then went about extracting the poison from her. Nami's cheeks turned a faint green color at the sight and she turned around quickly, babbling at Pedro to help her start cutting up the fish and disposing of the poisonous skin. Chopper hurried over and knelt down at her side, observing Law as he worked. Luffy did her best to relax. It didn't hurt. Nothing in Trafi's room ever hurt, but it did feel a little funny. "Ridiculous, absurd girl. Giving me so many migraines," Law muttered under his breath as he worked, removing any trace of the poison briskly. Thankfully it hadn't had any time to start spreading, so it wasn't a difficult fix, so troublesome. "Hee hee." Luffy giggled softly, her heart squeezing at the familiar-sounding words. "Sorry, Trafi." "You always say that, but are you really sorry?" Law groused, closing up her stomach. Oh, was he really mad at her? No, that had to be fixed quickly. Luffy reached up and pressed one hand against his cheek, causing him to briefly freeze mid-movement. "Yeah," she responded honestly, worrying with her bottom lip. "Course I do." Her thumb brushed against his cheekbone. Law stared wide-eyed at her for a second, before Chopper's concerned noise reminded him that he was technically still mid-operation. Grabbing her hand in his own, he brought it down and rested it on his knee so he could finish closing her up. "All right," he mumbles, dismissing the room once he's finished. His skin is burning where her fingers brushed against it. Boldness struck him. Law took her by the arm and pulled her to her feet. "Come with me," he said briskly. "You're staying where I can see you until the fish is done." Carrot and Chopper were already disposing of the skin, but he didn't trust that meat until Nami had thoroughly grilled it, and he knew from traveling with her that Luffy wasn't above stealing food straight out of the cooking pot to taste test. "Why?" Luffy pouted. "I'm going to pretend you didn't just ask me that." Law responded flatly. "You wanted to read Sora, didn't you?" She perked up. "You'll let me have the comics? I'm going to get you started on the series," Law said, pulling her inside one of the Sunny's rooms where it was marginally cooler and teleporting the relevant newspapers into his free hand. "And for that I need to explain the plot." Peckham's watched Law disappear with an excited Luffy and pinched the bridge of his nose. How was the Sun Goddess oblivious to her fellow captain's desire for her? How? This was legendary levels of density. Sora being oblivious to Poison Pink's advances didn't compare. This is going to be a disaster. "So that's Sanji's big sis," Luffy murmured, awed. She was wholly absorbed in the comic strip, hazel eyes wide with enthusiasm. Poison Pink was winking mischievously at the reader, having escaped Sora to trouble the world another day. This comic was amazing. Law had given her the papers and explained the plot of the long-running serial with that special brand of low-key enthusiasm that makes him look surprisingly cute. So many story beats, but they were so crazy and exciting that Luffy had no trouble remembering most of them. Especially when he was halfway through the Waterfall Island arc and Luffy realized why it sounded so familiar. It had been based off of one of Zephyr Gigi's missions. He'd been so surprised when she told him that, stars in her eyes. Luffy wanted to read all of it, begged Traffy to give her access to his stockpile of the comics. He'd refused to look at her and warned her that she wasn't allowed to read them without supervision, but his voice was really happy, she could tell. "Most likely," Traffy said in response to her question. "Bear in mind that her personality might be quite different from the comic books. The writers apply a good degree of artistic license." "Artist likes?" Luffy asked in confusion. Law sighed, rolling his eyes. "It means that the writer doesn't directly copy what happened in real life into their work, often changing things to be more dramatic and exciting for the reader." He explained with ass-cold muster. "The comic is published by affiliates of the world government, after all. Albeit affiliated in the loosest sense, the government kept a watchful eye on what was published in waters under their control." Luffy uttered a noise of understanding. She pressed into his side, peering hopefully at the pictures of the feared Germa soldiers. Law was really warm. Even though he'd reluctantly taken off his long coat and then his shirt as the heat intensified, leaning against him infused her with a pleasant feeling, like sitting in front of the fire in a late autumn evening sharing stories with Ace and Sabo. It was so nice. "I hope Pink is a little like this," she confides in Law. "I don't like the others. They remind me of Mingo." Pink's three brothers, not counting the mysterious Stealth Black, shared none of the redeeming qualities she possessed. It might be linked to a general attitude that women were inherently more empathetic and noble than men. But those three were viciously insufferable, arrogant, spiteful, and completely without scruples. Law tensed a little at the comparison. It was one he'd made himself over the years in the privacy of his mind, but still. When have we ever been that lucky? He wondered. "I'm very lucky," Luffy responded, looking up and blinking at him. "I have Ace and Sabo in my crew and you too." Law coughed to cover a pleased noise, his heart flipping over. "Hey, do you have a favorite part, Traffy?" "Favorite?" Law repeated, trying very hard to sound aloof even though he'd already exposed himself as a giant nerd. "I'm not a child, but since you're asking me, I suppose I prefer the arcs where Poison Pink is prominent." Shachi and Penguin always said ridiculous things about crushes whenever they caught him reading her passages. It wasn't his fault she was the most interesting and multifaceted antagonist in the series aside from Tyson the Revolutionary. The rest of them were just varying degrees of cackling, two-dimensional evil only interesting for the challenges that they provided Sora or the humor they displayed. She, I like her too," Luffy cheered, delighted. A sharp knock on the door interrupted the moment, however. "Oi, lovebirds," Nami called teasingly. Luffy yipped as Law immediately shot to his feet, causing her to topple over. She propped herself up on one arm and pouted up at him. "Lunch is ready." "Lunch?" Luffy cheered, getting up herself and bolting. Nami, knowing her too well at this point, expertly opened the door in time for her to rush through the opening instead of smashing through the wood. Law followed along sedately, his hands in his pockets, He tried not to look too annoyed. The table was set out under the shade of a tangerine tree, the enticing smell of the food filling the humid air. Luffy cheerfully flung herself into the nearest unoccupied chair and started chowing down on the meal. Once again, Nami had applied herself to one of Sanji's recipes with great success. Law had to admit it was well made when he tried it himself. "So, do we have a plan about how you're going to go on dates with Katakori?" Nami asked uneasily about halfway into the meal. "We don't know anything about this guy." "Don't worry about me," Luffy responded easily between bites. "I'll take care of it." Nami stared blandly at her captain. "Shouldn't you at least have a chaperone or something?" She prodded. "I don't like the idea of you being alone and surrounded by the Big Mom crew." Luffy wrinkled her nose. "I don't want somebody spying on us during dates. That would be weird and annoying. Plus, won't it make them suspicious?" "Wow, that sounds almost sensible," Chopper said, a little impressed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Luffy protested. The meal only lasted about 10 more minutes before the transponder snail started wringing its shell off of its back. Brook looked at the little creature in confusion. "That's odd. The others can't have arrived at Wano already, could they?" he asked in confusion. "No," Law said, eyes narrowing. "They need to travel 2 more days." "I know that sound," Peckham said, getting all eyes on him as he stood up. "It's an alert, informing the tarts that we're nearby so we won't get fired upon. Mama must have sent an escort after I informed her you were coming." Luffy's expression became carefully blank as she got up and walked over to the railing. Law grabbed his shirt off the back of his chair and put it on, not wanting to look vulnerable. Pedro tensed up and stood carefully behind Luffy, ready to defend her a moment's notice. Nami nervously fingered her Klima tact before firmly taking up a stoic look, putting Carrot behind her and joining her captain at the railing. Peckham's hopped up onto the railing, expecting to see one of the familiar tart ships cutting through the boiling waves towards them. Instead, out of the mist comes a massive transponder snail ship, its castle tower looming large over the Thousand Sunny. Luffy's lips parted in surprise as the ship chugged towards them. She'd never seen a ship of that shape before, and it's a perfect mirror of the ones she'd seen in Sora. This was a Germa ship, then. Sanji? She wondered hopefully, leaning on the railing and searching for any sign of blonde hair. Germa. Peckham's breathed out. Why them and not one of Big Mom's children? An uneasy feeling pooled in the mink's gut, growing stronger still since he'd decided to help the Straw Hat Girl against the woman he'd sworn to serve. Would Big Mom have sent them to get us? Nami asked, clutching her weapon. This wedding is supposed to make them allies, Law observed, his voice stoic. However, it is rather strange. He holds Kikoku in a loose but steady hold, ready to fight if necessary. They might be traveling on the ship, but I doubt they'd be pleased to do so. Chopper made a nervous sound and forced himself to stand up straight. The Germa ship came to a stop a few yards away from the Sunny, the waves from its hull causing the lion-headed vessel to bobble up and down like a cork in water. 2 figures walked up to the edge of the ship's railing. From the angle she's looking up at them, Luffy could just make out colors the pair were wearing, bright green and pink. "Hello there," a cheerful-sounding female voice came from the railing. Luffy blinked hard against the sunlight glaring from behind the ship. "You must be the Straw Hats. May we come aboard?" "Who's asking?" Luffy yelled back. "Vinsmokes, Sanji's big brother and sister," the girl's voice called back. Luffy's heart leapt into his chest. Sanji's family. It was them. Not just random goons King Vinsmoke had sent to suck up to them. Sanji. She thought for a moment, then nodded vehemently. "Yes. I want to meet you, come down." There's a light laugh followed by what sounded like a humph, and the 2 figures leapt from the railing, easily crossing the sizable distance between the 2 ships. A strange whirring sound echoes through the air as the twosome fall gracefully down until they alight on the grassy area of the deck. The first was a green-haired boy with a twirly eyebrow just like Sanji's, but his face was strangely blank aside from irritation and an undercurrent of annoyance. He has a headset with the number 66 painted on it, and he's dressed in green aside from his black overcoat. Winch green, Luffy realized, her heart flip-flopping, and Sanji's brother. The young lady is a little taller than the first figure, with a large purple coat designed to resemble butterfly wings and serving as a conduit for her particular abilities. She has the same headphones, and her shirt and pants are a bright pink. Her expression is warmer, curious and thoughtful. Her eyes are blue, just like Sanji's, and she has the twirly eyebrow too. Poison pink. So, this is Straw Hat Luffy. Winch Green said, his gaze raking up and down Luffy's figure. The raven-haired girl twitched, not liking the feeling it gave her. After a few seconds, his eyes turned into hearts and popped right out of his head. Cute. Cutie, so cute. This is who that failures be. His legs turned into a familiar whirlwind and he moves from side to side. The world is fucked up. A goddess deserves far better than him. What failure? Luffy asked, her eyebrows tabling. Something about the structure of that sentence bothered her. What failure could he be talking about? Poison Pink sighed deeply. Please ignore Yanji, he has very little inside his skull, she said with tired dryness. It's nice to meet you, Monkey D. Luffy. Sanji spoke of you when he first arrived, so I've been looking forward to this. My name is Vinsmoke Reiju, my brother and I have come to escort you the rest of the way to Totland. She offered Luffy her hand. The Ravenette smiled and took it. You're Sanji's big sis, she realized. You got the same twirly brow. Reiju can't help but giggle. What a disarming girl. That smile just made me relax a little. It's a family trait, she said. She looked between those standing behind Luffy and blinks when she spots Law. I don't recognize some of these faces. Where are the rest of your crewmates? Law frowned. Surely she'd seen his wanted poster and knew he wasn't a straw hat. Why wasn't she questioning his presence? It was deliberate. He could tell by the way her eyes flashed with thought before abruptly becoming unreadable. That was a very practiced action. One that characterized someone who couldn't afford to speak what was on their mind. What are you thinking, Poison Pink? I needed them to run an errand. Luffy responded, dutifully repeating the line Nami had drilled into her. She shrugged as if to say, what can you do? It was too important to be left hanging. With the Marines stirred up after Dressrosa, we won't be split up for long. Yanji continued to do his love hurricane thing, and while Reiju arched an eyebrow at that, she seemed to accept it. The Marines will be desperate for good publicity after having to publicly apologize and grovel like that, she observed. Especially since you were involved, again. Luffy snickered. Yeah, they don't like me very much, do they? She asked carelessly. Then she turned to the ship and stood on her toes, looking for any sign of a notable figure. Did Cat come with you? Cat? Reiju repeated, puzzled. Nami groaned. That's what she's been calling Charlotte Katakori. She'd tried to stop her, she really had, but it was useless as usual. No, though he had expressed interest in accompanying us, something came up. Reiju said. She remembered the faintly aggravated look in Katakori's eye when he'd been pulled away from her by one of his brothers, who insisted that Big Mom's summons couldn't wait. His mother wanted to discuss some things with him, I believe. Luffy pouted. She wanted to meet this guy already. Cute, Reiju couldn't help but think. If it helps, I'm here to take you to him, and Sanji. He'll be quite glad to see you, I think. Privately, she hoped that seeing his captain again would restore her little brother's spirits, and that they had a plan to wiggle their way out of Big Mom's attempt to snare the sun goddess and trap her in her clutches. Please, I can't save my brother, not without your help. Sun goddess, you're the only one who could do it. Maybe even I. No, it's far too late for me. That little ray of hope was torture. Why couldn't she make it go away? Luffy nodded, all but vibrating at the thought of being reunited with Sanji, and soon. Good. Let's go, to Totland.